He wasn't supposed to be on that road. She wasn't supposed to survive the night. A former Navy SEAL, who had walked away from everything, the missions, the medals, the man he used to be, was just trying to get home to his little girl when the Colorado mountains swallowed the world in white. Then he saw the taillights, fading, sinking, disappearing beneath 12 inches of new snow, and nobody coming, nobody close, nobody left in the entire frozen dark but him. What happened next on that mountain would change both their lives in ways neither of them could have predicted or survived alone. If stories like this one speak to something in you, stay with us. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss what comes next. Hit that like button and drop a comment below telling us the city and country where you're watching from. Every single one of those comments means the world to us. It tells us how far this story has traveled. Now settle in. This one takes a while to tell, and it's worth every minute. Plow garage smelled the way it always did in winter, diesel fuel and burnt coffee, and the particular cold that seeped through the corrugated walls, no matter how many space heaters Ray Colton kept running. Logan Vance didn't mind it. After everything he'd done and seen and carried home from places most people only read about in newspapers, he'd learned to appreciate a smell that was just a smell. No meaning attached, no memory hiding inside it, just oil and cold and work. He was under the chassis of Unit 7, replacing a hydraulic line that had cracked in the overnight freeze when his cell phone buzzed against the concrete floor beside his toolbox. Harper's school automated message. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and read it. Early dismissal. Storm advisory upgraded to emergency level. All Harlan County schools closing by noon. Logan checked his watch. It was already 11:40. He slid out from under the truck and sat up. Through the single window above Ray's desk, the sky had gone the color of old pewter, that particular flat gray, that people who hadn't grown up in mountain country sometimes mistook for ordinary cloud cover. Logan knew better. He'd watched enough of those skies roll in from the west during the 7 years he'd lived in Creston after leaving the Navy. That sky wasn't bringing a snowstorm. That sky was bringing erasure. Ray, he stood tucking the rag into his back pocket. I need to head out. Ray was 63, built like a refrigerator that had been left outside through a few too many winters, and he'd been running the county maintenance yard since before Logan was born. He looked up from his paperwork, looked at the window, looked back at Logan. Go, he said. Come in Monday if there's a Monday left. That was Ray's version of concern. Logan grabbed his jacket, his thermos, and the emergency kit he kept in his truck, force of habit from years when forgetting your kit meant someone else paid for it. The truck was a 2018 Ram, dark green, battered enough that nobody would think twice about it, but mechanically sound in ways that mattered. He'd rebuilt the engine himself over 2 winters. He knew every sound it made and what each one meant. He pulled out of the maintenance yard at 11:47. The drive from Creston to the house normally took 22 minutes on Route 9. By the time Logan had collected Harper from the school's emergency pickup line, and they'd stopped for the 2 bags of groceries he'd grabbed from Delaney's market, the visibility on Route 9 had dropped to maybe 60 feet. Snow was falling sideways. The temperature on his dashboard read 11 degrees Fahrenheit and still going down. Harper sat in the passenger seat with her seatbelt on and her library book open in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. She was 9 years old, small for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and her mother's way of watching the world like she was quietly cataloging everything she saw. She didn't talk when she was nervous. She just went still and read books she wasn't really reading. Logan kept both hands on the wheel and drove 30 miles an hour below the posted limit. You okay? He said. We're fine. Truck can handle this. I know. She turned a page she hadn't read. 3 miles from their turnoff, the county radio in his truck crackled. Kept it on out of habit, old professional habit. The kind that didn't disappear just because you'd changed professions. The dispatcher's voice was calm, the way emergency dispatchers trained themselves to be calm, which meant the situation was anything but. All units be advised, Route 9 mountain section between mile marker 14 and 22 is now closed effective immediately. Sustained winds 60 to 70 miles per hour on the upper elevation. 0 visibility reported. Emergency services suspended for the northern quadrant until further notice. Repeat emergency services are suspended. Harper's book closed in her lap. Dad, it's fine, Logan said. We're below mile marker 14. Turnoff's at 12.6. How do you know? I drove this road about 800 times. She opened her book again. Her hands, he noticed, were gripping it tighter than before. He didn't tell her what the radio message actually meant. What it meant was that if something went wrong between here and their turnoff, nobody was coming. The county didn't have the equipment to run rescue operations in conditions like this, and even if they did, the dispatchers had just told the whole mountain that it didn't matter. Suspended. That word had a very specific weight to it, and Logan had heard it before, in different contexts, with different stakes attached. It meant you are on your own. He'd been on his own before. He knew how to handle it. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known at 2:14 on a Tuesday afternoon in January, was that he wasn't going to make it home without stopping. He saw them at mile marker 13.4. 2 red taillights, barely visible, set at the wrong angle. Not the angle of a car parked on the shoulder. Not the angle of a car whose driver had pulled over to wait out the worst of the snow. The wrong angle entirely, the angle of something that had gone off the road and wasn't coming back without help. Logan slowed to a crawl. Through the whiteout, as his headlights pushed maybe 40 feet into the dark, he could make out the shape. A large SUV, luxury model, he could see the slope of the roof even under the inches of snow that had already accumulated on it. It was nose down in the drainage ditch on the right shoulder, the back end tilted up, and to the left, driver's side partially visible. "Stay in the truck," Logan said. Harper looked up sharply. "What?" "There's a car in the ditch. I'm going to check it." He put the Ram in park, left the engine running and the heat on. "Lock the door after me. Don't get out. Don't open the door for anybody but me. You understand?" She stared at him, her mother's eyes. That particular stillness. "Harper, do you understand?" "Yes," she said quietly. He pulled his coat tighter, grabbed his emergency kit from behind the seat, and opened the door into 38 miles per hour of wind that hit him like a wall. The cold was the deep, physical kind, not uncomfortable, not unpleasant, but immediate and demanding, the kind of cold that said, "Pay attention to me or I will hurt you." Logan paid attention. He crossed the 6 feet of shoulder between his truck and the ditch in a controlled crouch, keeping low against the wind. Up close, the SUV was worse than it had looked from the road. The front end was buried nearly to the hood ornament. The windshield had a large crack running corner-to-corner impact damage, not cold. The driver's side window was intact, but fogged completely opaque from whatever warm air remained inside. He tried the driver's door. Locked. He pressed his face against the window, cupped his hands around his eyes. Inside, a figure, upright in the seat but wrong, head tilted. Not moving. He tried the back door, also locked. He went around to the passenger side, tried those. Locked. Logan Vance had once spent 11 hours extracting a wounded teammate from a collapsed structure in a country he still wasn't allowed to name in conversation. He had breached doors, cut through metal, and pulled people out of situations that looked, on paper, incompatible with survival. He reached into his emergency kit and found the window punch he kept there, a small spring-loaded tool, barely the size of a thumb, that he'd purchased at a truck stop 3 years ago and never expected to use. He pressed it against the lower corner of the passenger side window and triggered it. The glass collapsed inward, clean and sudden, the way tempered glass did. He knocked the remaining fragments aside with his gloved hand and reached in to unlock the door. The interior light came on. The woman in the driver's seat was maybe 30, though the pallor of her skin made it hard to tell. Dark hair, expensive coat, one hand still loosely holding the steering wheel, as though she'd simply fallen asleep mid-drive. There was blood on her left temple, not a lot, but fresh. The airbag had deployed. The smell inside the SUV was that particular combination of airbag chemical and cooling air that he recognized from places he'd rather not remember. He pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck. Pulse. Faint but steady. She was alive. "Hey." He put his hand on her shoulder and shook gently but firmly. "Hey, open your eyes." "Nothing. I need you to open your eyes." "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. "Just barely." "Good. That's good. Keep doing that." He was already checking her, running through the assessment protocol so deeply ingrained it required no thought. Head wound manageable. Breathing shallow but present. Left arm when he touched it, she made a sound, low and involuntary, and he felt the way her forearm moved slightly wrong. Possible fracture or bad sprain. He moved to her legs. Right ankle swollen inside the boot, she winced when he pressed it, even unconscious. The temperature inside the SUV, which had been running long enough to be warm when she crashed, was already approaching the outside air. His breath was fogging. He had maybe minutes before hypothermia stopped being a risk and started being a fact. Okay, Logan said to himself as much as to her. We're doing this. He got her door open from the inside, released her seatbelt. The move of getting her out of the seat without aggravating the arm or the ankle or whatever had happened to her head required the specific kind of patience that most people didn't have and couldn't develop under pressure, the patience of someone who had learned that rushing a rescue was how you turned a bad situation into a fatal one. He took his time. He was quick about it anyway. When he had her out of the seat and her weight against him, she was lighter than he'd expected, or he was stronger than he remembered. He started back toward the truck. The wind hit them both. She made another sound, something between a groan and a word, and her head came up slightly. Hold on, Logan told her. I've got you. 40 feet of shoulder in 38-mile-per-hour wind, carrying a woman who couldn't walk and shouldn't be moved without a backboard and a medical team. He knew that. He also knew that the medical team was suspended, the backboard was in an ambulance that wasn't coming, and leaving her in that ditch meant she didn't see morning. So he carried her, the same way he had carried people in other conditions, other emergencies, other years of his life, that felt sometimes like they'd happened to someone else entirely. One foot in front of the other. Keep low. Keep moving. Don't stop. He made it to the Ram in 45 seconds. Harper had the back door open before he got there. He hadn't told her to do that, hadn't expected it. But there she was, standing in the open doorway with the interior light behind her, and her face doing that thing it did when she was scared, and refusing to show it the same look her mother used to get. She's hurt, Logan said. I know. I saw. Harper moved to the far side of the back seat without being asked. What do I do? Get the emergency kit from the front. The flat one, under the seat. He was getting the woman settled across the back seat, trying to keep her arm stable and her ankle elevated on the door panel. And give me your coat. My coat? Yours is warmer than the blanket in the kit. I need it on her right now. Harper unzipped her coat without argument. Handed it over. Logan tucked it around the woman from collar to knee. The woman's eyes opened, not fully halfway, glassy with pain and the particular confusion of someone coming back from somewhere dark. She looked at the roof of the truck, looked at Logan. What? She stopped. Swallowed. What happened? You went off the road. Your SUV is in the ditch back there. Logan pulled his own coat off and laid it over hers. He'd regulated in worse temperatures than this. You've got a cut on your head, possible fracture in your left arm. Your right ankle is either sprained or broken. Do you understand what I'm telling you? She blinked. Processing, he could watch it happening behind her eyes. My phone, she said. No signal has been for the last hour. I need to call. There's nobody to call. Emergency services are suspended. The road back down is closed. He kept his voice even. Not gentle, not harsh, just clear. The tone he'd used in situations where confusion was the enemy. My name is Logan Vance. I'm going to take you somewhere warm and deal with those injuries. When the storm lifts, we'll get you out. She stared at him. The glassy confusion in her eyes was being replaced by something sharper. Even hurt, even barely conscious, she was cataloging him, he could see it. Assessing. The kind of gaze that was used to looking at situations and calculating control. You can't just... She stopped again when the truck moved, Logan pulling a careful U-turn on the empty road. I just did, he said. Rest. We've got about 12 minutes to the cabin. From the front seat, Harper's voice came carefully. Is she going to be okay? Logan looked in the rearview mirror. The woman in his back seat had closed her eyes again. Her breathing was still too shallow for his liking, her lips still too pale. But she was breathing. She was here. Yeah, he said. She's going to be okay. He didn't know yet what it would take to make that true. He didn't know yet who she was, that her name was Celeste Arden, that her face appeared on business magazine covers, that she commanded a technology company with a valuation that had more zeros in it than Logan's annual salary had digits. None of that had come up yet. On a mountain that was burying itself in snow, with the roads closed behind them and the radio playing static, and his daughter sitting in the front seat in her shirt sleeves because she'd given her coat to a stranger without being asked on that mountain, in that truck. In that particular 12 minutes, none of it mattered at all. What mattered was the next 12 minutes, and the 12 after that. That was how survival worked. Logan had always known that. He just hadn't expected to need to know it again. The cabin was 800 square feet of pine log and river stone, set back from a dirt road that the county plows never bothered with. Logan had bought it for $42,000 4 years ago, when the previous owner decided the winters were too much and moved to Arizona. It wasn't beautiful by any standard that required explaining to other people. But it had a wood stove, solid insulation, a well that didn't freeze above -20, and a second bedroom where Harper slept surrounded by books and soccer trophies and photographs of a woman who was no longer there to hang them herself. He got Celeste inside while Harper ran ahead to build up the fire. He laid her on the couch, propped her left arm on a folded blanket, elevated her right ankle. Cut on her temple had stopped bleeding but needed cleaning. He found the medical kit in the hall closet, the real one, not the truck kit, the one he'd built himself over the first year in the cabin when he was still waking at 3 in the morning with his hands looking for things that weren't there. He cleaned the wound. She hissed in pain and her eyes opened all the way. "Hold still," Logan said. "You're not a doctor." Her voice was stronger now. Still rough, but the sharpness in it was coming back. "No. Then why? Because you need this done and I know how to do it. You want to argue about credentials? We can do that when your core temperature comes back up." He pressed a gauze pad to the cut. "Hold this." She lifted her right hand, her good arm, and held the gauze without further argument. Watching him, that cataloging gaze again. "You carried me," she said. "Couldn't walk." From the ditch. That she stopped. Something moved across her face that wasn't pain. That's a long way to carry someone. Logan didn't answer. He was wrapping her ankle, working efficiently, the way military medical training taught you to work: no wasted motion, no unnecessary contact, nothing that said this is going to hurt before it did. "What is this place?" she asked. "My house." She looked around. At the wood paneling, the low ceiling, the stack of Harper's library books on the coffee table, the photograph above the wood stove, a woman laughing at something outside the frame. Dark hair, dark eyes, taken in summer. The woman in the photograph had Harper's face, or Harper had hers. Celeste looked at the photograph for a moment. Then she looked at Logan. She didn't ask about it. Whatever she was, she had the instinct to leave that one alone. "How long?" she said instead, "the storm?" Radio said through Thursday at least. Could be longer at this elevation. He tied off the ankle wrap and sat back on his heels. "You need to drink something warm. Can you keep it down?" She considered that seriously, which he respected. "I think so. Then I'll get you something." He stood. Paused. "What's your name?" She looked at him. "Celeste Arden." The name meant nothing to him. He nodded once. "Logan Vance," he said, though he'd already told her that. Then he went to the kitchen, where Harper was standing on her step stool to reach the stove, already heating water for the instant broth packets they kept in the emergency shelf. She looked at him over her shoulder. 9 years old, in her shirt sleeves, having given her coat to a stranger in a snowstorm without being asked. "She seems scared," Harper said quietly, "even though she's trying not to show it." Logan looked at his daughter for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "She does. Is it okay that I noticed?" "It's very okay that you noticed." Harper turned back to the stove. Outside, the wind hit the cabin walls with a sound like something trying to get in. The wood stove ticked and settled. The snow kept falling. Inside the small lit room, the water began to heat. The broth was instant chicken, from a foil packet that had been sitting in the emergency shelf since October, and it tasted exactly like what it was. Celeste drank it anyway, both hands wrapped around the mug, her good arm doing most of the work, the injured left held close against her ribs. She sat propped against the arm of the couch, with a folded blanket behind her back and another across her legs, and she drank the cheap broth without complaint, which told Logan something about how bad she actually felt. Harper had gone to bed at 9:30, after spending 40 minutes sitting cross-legged on the floor near the wood stove, ostensibly reading but actually watching Celeste, the way she watched everything she found interesting quietly and from a slight angle, as if direct attention might make the thing disappear. She'd said goodnight with the particular formality she adopted around strangers, very straight-backed, very deliberate. "Good night," she'd said, and then added, unprompted, "I hope your arm feels better." Celeste had looked at her with an expression Logan couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she'd said. "What's your name?" "Harper." Good name. Harper had considered that seriously, nodded once, and gone to her room. The door didn't quite latch it, never did. The frame had shifted in the cold, and a thin line of light stayed visible underneath it for another hour before it finally went dark. Now it was past 11. The wind outside had stopped pretending to be wind and had become something more elemental, a sustained roar that pressed against the walls with the kind of persistence that made you aware of every gap in the insulation, every place where the logs had settled unevenly. The temperature outside had dropped to 4 degrees. Logan knew this because the thermometer he'd mounted on the porch post was visible through the kitchen window, and he'd checked it twice. He was sitting in the chair, across from the couch, the one he usually read in, with a cup of actual coffee, not from a packet, because if he was going to be awake all night monitoring a concussion, he was going to do it with decent coffee. His medical kit was on the side table within reach. He'd already checked Celeste's pupils twice in the last 3 hours, not explaining why, just doing it, and she'd let him without asking until the second time. Concussion protocol, she'd said then, not a question. The cut wasn't deep enough to need stitches, but you lost consciousness before I found you, and you were disoriented for a while after. He'd kept the penlight steady. Equal and reactive. That's good. I know what concussion protocol is. She'd paused. My older brother played hockey. He had 3 of them by the time he was 20. Logan had noted that, filed it away without pushing. Now she was awake and staring at the wood stove, the empty mug still in her hands, and the expression on her face was the one he'd seen twice before, in the evening, not pain, not anxiety. Not the controlled CEO composure she'd worn for most of the first few hours. Something quieter, something that only came out when she forgot for a moment to keep it put away. "You should try to sleep," Logan said. "I slept for most of the afternoon." That was unconsciousness, not sleep. They're different. Glanced at him. "You sound like you've explained that before." Once or twice. She looked back at the stove. The fire needed another log in about 20 minutes. He was tracking it by the sound and the light without looking directly at it, the same way he tracked most things in a room. "Is there any way to know how long?" Celeste asked. Realistically. Not until the radio clears up enough to get a real forecast. Last thing I caught, before it went to static, was through Thursday. Today's Tuesday. He set his coffee down. If the pass stays closed, even after the snow stops, it could be another day or 2 before they get the plows through. The county road crew doesn't prioritize this section. She was quiet for a moment. He watched her process. It watched the CEO part of her brain try to find the variable she could control, the lever she could push. There wasn't one. He'd seen that realization hit people before, people who were used to being the one who made things happen. Tended to land differently on different people. "I have a board meeting Friday," she said. "Okay. There are people who are going to be looking for me." "They'll be looking," Logan said. "They won't find you until the road opens. Your car isn't visible from the road anymore. It's in 2 feet of snow by now. If anyone drove past, they'd see a snowdrift, not a vehicle." He kept his voice even. "Your phone is useless here. Mine too. The cabin radio's getting nothing but static. I'm not telling you this to worry you. I'm telling you because it's the situation, and you seem like someone who does better with the actual information." She looked at him for a long moment. "I do," she said. "Then most people lead with reassurance. Most people find that easier. Don't you?" "Not particularly." He picked his coffee back up. "It doesn't usually help." She almost smiled. It was brief, and it had pain in it, the ankle maybe, or the arm, or something else, but it was there. "No," she said, "it doesn't. The first full day was the hardest, the way first full days in confined situations tended to be. The novelty of the emergency had worn off, but the emergency itself hadn't." Celeste woke on the couch, stiff and disoriented, her ankle throbbing, and her arm aching in the deep bone-tired way that meant the body had spent the night trying to repair something and hadn't finished yet. Logan was already up. She could hear him in the kitchen and smell the coffee and hear the low murmur of his voice as he talked to Harper about something in a tone too quiet to make out. She lay there for a few minutes, looking at the ceiling. The cabin ceiling was pine board, the kind that had been installed when the lumber was still green and had dried unevenly over the years, leaving small gaps in places that someone had filled with what looked like wood putty. Someone who was not a finished carpenter. Someone who had done it themselves, practically, without much concern for aesthetics. The photograph above the wood stove was visible from where she lay. The laughing woman. Dark hair. She was sitting on the hood of a truck, summer light, something happening just outside the frame that she found completely delightful. Photograph was slightly crooked. Nobody had straightened it. Celeste looked at it for a while and then looked away. Logan appeared in the doorway with a mug. He handed it to her without ceremony, the way he'd done everything without performing it, without making it into a moment. Just the thing that needed to happen, done. How's the arm? Tested it, carefully. Worse than last night. That's normal. Inflammation peaks around 12 to 16 hours. He crouched down and unwrapped her ankle, examined it with practiced hands that pressed in specific places and waited for her response. This is a bad sprain. Could be a hairline fracture, but I can't tell without imaging. Either way, the treatment's the same, immobilized and elevated. Can't stay on this couch for 3 days. You can use the crutches from the shed once I find them. But you're not putting weight on that ankle without support. He rewrapped it with the same efficient movements she'd noticed the night before. I also need you to eat something real. Harper's making eggs. She doesn't have to, wanted to. He stood. She likes having someone to cook for. It's something she got from her mother. It was the first time he'd referenced the woman in the photograph. He said it the way you said something that was simply true. No inflection designed to invite further conversation. No inflection designed to close it off. Just the fact of it, sitting there in the space between them. Celeste picked up her coffee mug with her good hand. How long ago? She asked. He was already turning back to the kitchen. He paused for just a moment, not long, not dramatically. Just a beat. 4 years, he said. Then he went to help Harper with the eggs. Harper turned out to be a better cook than Logan, for reasons that became obvious once Celeste spent more than 20 minutes in the cabin. The girl had a precision about her, the same measuring cup used every time, the same number of stirs, the same temperature checked by holding her hand a specific distance from the pan's surface. She didn't do it self-consciously. It was just how she operated. Logan cooked the way he did everything else, sufficiently, practically, without much interest in the result beyond whether it worked. They ate at the small table by the kitchen window. Harper had cleared her school papers off it without being asked, stacking them in a corner with the careful organization of someone who'd learned to keep her own things in order. Outside the window, the snow was still falling, more gently now than overnight, but steadily. "Do you like science?" Harper asked Celeste. This was apparently the conversational topic she'd decided on. Celeste looked up from her eggs. "I do, actually. I studied computer engineering in college." Harper's expression shifted, not impressed exactly, but recalibrated. "My teacher says computer engineering is one of the hardest ones." "Your teacher is right. I failed my second-year algorithms class the first time I took it." Harper tilted her head. "You failed completely." Had to retake it. Celeste took another bite. "Best thing that happened to me. The second time I understood what I'd missed the first time." Harper considered this with the seriousness she applied to everything. Then she looked at Logan. "You said you couldn't fail things in the Navy." "I said the consequences of failing were different in the Navy," Logan said. "Not that failure was impossible. Did you fail things?" "Yes." Harper seemed to be building some kind of internal database from this information. She turned back to her eggs and ate for a while without talking, which in Harper's case did not mean she'd stopped thinking. Celeste caught Logan's eye across the table, gave her the smallest possible shrug, which she interpreted correctly as, "This is how she is. You'll get used to it." Logan found the crutches in the equipment shed after lunch, along with a bag of road salt he'd forgotten he had, and a camp lantern with working batteries, which he brought inside as a precaution. He adjusted the crutches to Celeste's height with a wrench and a screwdriver, and showed her how to manage the one step down from the cabin's front room to the short hallway without putting weight on the ankle. She was a fast study. She didn't thank him excessively or make the crutches into a bigger deal than they were. She just learned how to use them. By mid-afternoon, she'd made it to the chair by the window and had been sitting there for an hour, watching the snow and the dark tree line, when Logan came in from splitting wood and found her with her jaw tight and her eyes slightly too fixed on the middle distance. He set the wood down by the stove. What? It wasn't quite a question. Exhaled. Nothing. Just thinking. About the board meeting. About... She stopped, pressed her fingers against her forehead just below the bandaged cut. About everything that's on hold. There are 12 people whose decisions are waiting on mine. There's an acquisition review that was supposed to go to final stage this week. My assistant, she stopped again. She's going to be losing her mind. She'll manage. She's 24 and she's been with me for 8 months. Then she'll figure it out. Logan put a log on the fire. Or she won't, and you'll fix it when you get back. Either way, you sitting in that chair running the scenarios isn't going to change it. Celeste looked at him. You know, most people, when they tell someone to stop worrying, they sound either dismissive or patronizing. And you just sound correct, which is somehow worse. He almost smiled. She noticed. Your company, he said, settling into his reading chair. The technology one. What does it do? She blinked. Apparently she wasn't used to that question being asked quite so plainly. Software infrastructure. Enterprise systems. We build the architecture that other companies run their operations on. She paused. You don't know who I am. Should I? Most people. She stopped. No, you shouldn't necessarily. She looked back at the window. Strange. I've spent 10 years building something recognizable, and you're the first person in a long time who just asked what it did. Logan didn't respond to that. He picked up the book he'd left on the side table, A History of the Korean War, that he'd been working through for 3 weeks, and opened it to his page. After a moment, Celeste said, My brother started the company with me. Logan looked up. Wesley. She said the name like it was a word she still tested the weight of before she used it. He was 5 years older, the business brain. I was the technical one. He was the one who could sell anything to anyone, who could walk into a room of investors and have them writing checks in 40 minutes. She paused. He died 3 years ago. Heart condition nobody knew about. 41 years old. No warning, no nothing. Just gone. The fire made a sound in the stove. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. I'm sorry, Logan said. After he died, I just worked. That was all I knew how to do. Every acquisition, every expansion, every round of funding. I told myself it was for the company, for what we'd built. But I think I just didn't know what else to do with myself. She said it plainly, the way a person said something they'd understood for a while, but hadn't said out loud. Company became everything. Not because I loved it that much. Because grief takes up a lot of space, and I needed something to fill the rest. Logan set his book down. Yeah, he said. I know how that works. She looked at him, waiting. After Sarah died, he stopped. Said her name again, quietly, like testing whether it still fit in his mouth the right way. Sarah. After she died, I went back to work in a way that he considered the right words. Logan was not a man who used more words than he needed, and he was careful with the ones he did use. I'd been thinking about getting out of the SEALs anyway. She was sick for 8 months before she died, and I was stateside for most of it, and being home reminded me what I'd been missing while I was gone. So when she died, I thought, he stopped again. I thought getting out was the right thing for Harper. Being home, being a father. But I took every available deployment contract for the first year and a half anyway. Wasn't a SEAL anymore, but there were private contracts. Security work. High-risk consulting, which is the polite way of saying things I still don't particularly want to describe. He looked at the fire. I was gone more than I was home. Told myself it was the money, or the skills, or whatever other reason sounded reasonable. But Harper was 7 years old, and she was being raised by Ray's wife, Carol, who is a good woman who is not her parent. He paused. Carol said something to me once. She said Harper cried when I left. But she'd stopped crying when I came back, and that's when I knew I'd broken something important. The room was very quiet. "What did you do?" Celeste asked. "I came home, took the county job, built a routine." He looked around the cabin briefly, at the low ceiling and the photographs and the slightly crooked picture above the stove. "It wasn't dramatic. I just stopped leaving." "Did it work?" "Most days." He picked his book back up, then put it down again. "Harper cries when I leave for work now." Which sounds like the opposite of good, but it's not. Celeste was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't have anyone who would notice if I didn't come home." She said it without self-pity, just as information. The way she stated most things. Logan looked at her directly. She held the look. "That's not nothing to know about yourself," he said. "No," she said. "It's not." The card game started on the second evening because Harper produced a deck from somewhere. She was the kind of child who always knew where things were in a house and announced that she wanted to play rummy, and that was largely that. Celeste had played rummy as a child with her grandmother, and she was better at it than she'd expected to still be. Logan played the way he did most things, strategically, without making a show of it, waiting people out. Harper played aggressively and complained about every bad hand with the dramatic conviction of someone who found bad luck personally offensive. "This is statistically impossible," she said, looking at her cards with an expression of genuine grievance after losing the third round. "Statistics don't guarantee outcomes per hand," Celeste said. "They guarantee outcomes over many hands." "How many hands?" "Depends on the game. For a deck this size, probably hundreds." Harper looked at her cards, then at Celeste. "Are you trying to make me feel better or worse?" "Neither. I'm just telling you how probability works." "It's not working." Logan said nothing. He laid down a winning hand. Harper made a sound that was not quite a word. "Dad. Did you teach me to shuffle wrong? Because I think you taught me to shuffle wrong." "I taught you to shuffle the way I shuffle, which might be wrong." "It might be," he agreed. Harper reshuffled the cards badly, the way she always did, which produced a sound like a small disaster, and dealt the next hand with the focused determination of someone who believed that effort would eventually overcome probability. Celeste found herself laughing. It surprised her. Not the laugh itself, but the fact that it was real unperformed, unstrategic, just a laugh at a 9-year-old's certainty that the universe would eventually correct itself if she shuffled the cards firmly enough. Logan saw it. He looked at her across the table just for a moment, just long enough to register it, and then looked back at his cards. On the third day, the radio came back. Not fully, it drifted in and out, fragmented by static, but enough to confirm what Logan had estimated. The storm was breaking, but the upper mountain passes were still closed, and the county road crew was working from the valley up, which meant Route 9's northern section. Their section wouldn't see a plow for at least another 36 hours. Possibly 48. Celeste took this better than she had taken the initial assessment. Something had shifted in her in the 2 days inside the cabin. Logan could see it without being able to name it exactly. She was still sharp, still precise, still the person who noticed everything and filed it efficiently. But the tension that had sat across her shoulders like a physical thing for the first day had loosened slightly. Not gone, just carried differently. She'd started helping with small things that she could manage on the crutches. Setting the table, folding the blankets in the morning. She'd spent an hour helping Harper with a math problem that Harper had insisted she didn't need help with, and then needed help with, and the negotiation of that transition had involved Celeste simply sitting beside her and saying, "I'm not helping you, I'm just thinking about the same problem at the same time," and Harper accepting this with the dignity of someone who understood exactly what was happening and appreciated being allowed to pretend she didn't. Logan, watching from the kitchen doorway, had felt something he couldn't name. He went out to split more wood and didn't think about it. But in the afternoon, when Harper was napping and the cabin was quiet and the snow outside had lightened to something almost peaceful, Celeste found him at the kitchen table with a thermos and a map of the county road system, old habit. He'd kept paper maps since a mission in which digital navigation had failed at a critical moment, and someone had paid for it, and she sat across from him. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask." "The Navy. What kind of work?" He looked up from the map. "SEAL teams. 12 years. 12 years." She absorbed that. "Where?" everywhere they needed us. He folded the edge of the map. I'd rather not be specific. Fair enough. She paused. Was it she seemed to be searching for a question that wasn't the obvious one, the one everyone asked. Did you want to come home when you were there? He looked at her. It was an unusual question. Not what was it like or did you see combat, both of which people asked because they wanted a story. This was something else. Sometimes, he said, toward the end, mostly. In the beginning, I didn't want to come home. I wanted to go deeper in. He paused. That changes. Most things change if you do them long enough. What changed it? Sarah. And then Sarah getting sick. And then he stopped. You figure out at some point that going deeper in is the same impulse that makes some people drink too much. Comfortable. It's controlled. You understand the rules. It's the other things that are harder. Celeste had her hands around a mug of coffee she'd made it herself, navigating the kitchen on crutches with a focus that Logan had privately found impressive. She looked at him steadily. I built 2 floors of executive offices and a boardroom, and a company of 900 people, she said. And I've been alone in all of it for 3 years. Not lonely. Alone, do you know the difference? Yeah, Logan said. I do. Lonely is wanting people around you. Alone is, she paused. Alone is having people around you and being unavailable to all of them anyway. That's right. Outside, a branch snapped somewhere under the weight of accumulated snow. The sound echoed and was swallowed by the white quiet. My CFO sent me 14 messages the day after Wesley died, Celeste said. About the Q4 projections. I answered 12 of them. She looked at her coffee. I told myself that's what Wesley would have wanted. That keeping the company going was honoring him. She was quiet for a moment. I've been telling myself that for 3 years. I'm not sure it's true anymore. Logan didn't offer her anything easy. He waited, the way he'd learned to wait, not empty waiting, but the kind that left room for whatever came next. The board wants to take the company public, she said. IPO, Wesley always said we'd know when the time was right. She paused. The time is technically right. The market's right, the valuation's right, the story's right. But she stopped. Running, Logan said. She looked at him. You said you were heading somewhere important when you crashed. I said I needed to get to a meeting. You did say that. He met her eyes. That's not what I asked. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes in when 2 people have run out of the energy it takes to maintain a comfortable distance, and what's left is just the truth of the room. I was driving to the resort, she said finally. Not a board meeting. There's no board meeting until next month. She looked at her hands. I just needed to be somewhere that wasn't my office. And I drove instead of booking a flight because I thought. She stopped. Laughed once quietly, without humor. I thought the drive would clear my head. That was the genius plan, did it? I ran my luxury SUV into a ditch in a blizzard. That's not a no, Logan said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she laughed again, different this time. Real. He'd only heard it once before, at the card table with Harper, and it was the same, unguarded, slightly surprised at itself, like a sound that had gotten out when she wasn't watching the door. No, she said. I suppose it's not. That night, after Harper had gone to bed and the wood stove had been loaded, and the wind had settled into its register against the north wall, Celeste was lying on the couch, and Logan was in his chair, and neither of them was quite asleep when the sound came from above them. Not a creak. Not the kind of sound that old cabins made in cold weather. He knew all of those, had cataloged them in the months after he'd moved in, the same way he cataloged sounds in every space he occupied. This was different, lower, more structural. Logan was out of the chair before he was fully conscious of having decided to move. He stood in the center of the room and listened, tilted his head. The sound came again directly above, toward the roof peak. A settling, then silence, then a sharper sound, distinct and deliberate, the sound of something under load finding its limit. Crossed to the window and looked out. The snow on the roof was deeper than he'd realized. 3, maybe 4 feet on the north face, where the wind had been packing it all day. He hadn't gotten up to clear it, because the roof was a steep pitch designed for exactly this. The reason he'd bought this cabin over the other one he'd looked at, but the north face ran flat for about 8 feet before it reached the peak, and he could see from the way the eave line had shifted that the load up there was substantial. He went to the hallway. Knocked once, lightly, on Harper's door. "Dad?" Immediately. She wasn't asleep. "Get up and come to my room. Bring your blanket." A pause. "Why?" "I want you on the south side of the house tonight." Another pause in which he could hear her assembling the information and deciding not to push on it.
Okay.
He went back to the front room. Celeste was sitting up, the blanket pulled around her shoulders, watching him. "How bad?" she said. "I don't know yet." He was pulling on his coat. "I need to get up there. But first I'm moving you to the back bedroom. It's on the south side. I can manage the crutches." "Leave the crutches. I'll carry you." She opened her mouth. "We can talk about it afterward," Logan said. "Right now I need you moving." She closed her mouth. He got her to the back bedroom, the practical business of it, no different than carrying her through the snow 2 days earlier. Just a problem with a solution, and got Harper settled in there too, both of them on the bed with the blankets piled. Harper sat cross-legged against the headboard and watched everything with the same quiet attention she applied to everything. "Is it going to fall?" Harper asked. "I don't know yet." "What are the chances?" "Harper." He looked at her directly. "I'll be right back. Stay here." He went back through the cabin, grabbed the roof rake from the utility closet, and was heading for the door when the first sound came, not a crack, but a groan, something long and sustained and building, the sound of structural wood finding out what it was made of. Logan stopped. He heard very clearly the sound of the living room roof beginning to give. He was already moving back down the hallway. He was halfway to the bedroom when it came down. The sound was enormous, not an explosion, but a compression, a concussive boom, and then the extended tearing noise of pine timber and roof board, and several tons of compacted snow, deciding simultaneously that the structure beneath them was no longer adequate. The living room wall shook. Dust came through under the doorframe. Something, a beam or a board, hit the floor with a crack that resonated through the whole cabin like a struck bell. Then silence. Logan pushed open the bedroom door. Harper and Celeste were both on the bed, Harper's arms around her knees, Celeste's hand braced against the headboard. Both of them looking at him. Both of them fine. "Okay," Logan said. He was breathing harder than he wanted to be. "Okay. Everyone okay?" Harper nodded once. Celeste looked past him toward the hallway. "The living room," she said. "Yeah." He pulled the door shut behind him and stood in the hallway for a moment, listening. No more movement from above. No secondary sounds of further failure. Structural noise had stopped. He opened the door to the living room and looked. The north section of the roof had come in. A section maybe 12 feet wide, from the peak down to the wall, had collapsed inward, the pine beams folded at the middle, the roofing boards splintered and driven down into the living room. The snow following them in a dense, compressed mass that had buried the couch, the side table, his reading chair, the wood stove's loading area. The photograph above the stove was buried. The room was open to the night sky in a ragged gap, and cold air was pouring in with absolute commitment. Logan stood there for a moment. He looked at where his chair had been. He looked at where the couch had been. He thought about where he and Celeste had been sitting 2 hours ago, having a real conversation for the first time in what felt like a long time. He went back to the bedroom. Harper looked at him with those dark eyes. "How bad? The living room's gone." He said it plainly. "The bedroom and the kitchen are fine. We'll stay here. I'm going to block the hallway door and get the camp lantern and figure out the heat." "Can the wood stove?" "No. But I've got the camp heater in the shed, and the shed is connected through the back." He was already thinking it through, running the inventory, assessing the options. It was a different kind of thinking from what he did at the county garage, more urgent, less mechanical. The old kind of thinking. "We'll be okay." He said it the way he'd said most true things in the last 2 days, without performance, without comfort built into the delivery. Just the assessment. Celeste from the bed said Logan. He looked at her. "We believe you," she said. Harper leaned slightly against Celeste's good shoulder. It was a small movement, unconscious, probably, the way a child leaned toward warmth without thinking about it. Celeste did not move away. Logan looked at both of them for a moment. Then he went to find the camp heater. Because the temperature in the cabin was already dropping and the night was going to be long, and belief, whatever it was worth, did not generate its own heat. Camp heater was a propane unit, orange and battered, The kind sold at outdoor supply stores for people who went camping voluntarily rather than the kind Logan had acquired, because he lived alone on a mountain with a 9-year-old and understood that preparation was not pessimism. He'd kept 2 full propane canisters in the equipment, shed enough for 30 hours of continuous use at the medium setting, which in a room the size of the back bedroom would maintain a survivable temperature, even if the hallway door held and the window didn't leak too badly. The hallway door was the problem. He'd blocked it with the kitchen table, wedged at an angle against the frame, and stuffed the gap along the bottom with 2 folded moving blankets from the shed. It slowed the cold air coming through from the collapsed living room. Did not stop it. By midnight, the bedroom temperature had stabilized at roughly 51 degrees, which was cold enough to be uncomfortable and not cold enough to be immediately dangerous, and Logan was operating somewhere in the space between those 2 assessments, trying to determine which direction it was going to go. He sat on the floor with his back against the bed frame and watched the heater's flame indicator and did the math he'd been doing since he'd found the propane canisters. 30 hours of fuel, maybe 48 hours until the road crew reached their section. There was a gap in that math that he didn't like, and he'd already identified 3 possible ways to close it: the wood stove in the shed, the secondary propane line that fed the kitchen range, if the kitchen wall had held the collapse without damage to the line, and the simple fact that body heat in a small room with 3 people was not nothing, and he was quietly running through each option without saying any of it out loud. Harper was asleep. She'd gone under quickly, the way children did when they were truly exhausted, all at once and completely, curled on her side with her blanket pulled to her chin and her breathing steady. She'd asked once more, before sleep, whether they were going to be okay, and Logan had said yes, and she'd accepted that, which was either trust or exhaustion or both, and he wasn't going to examine which too closely. Celeste was not asleep. She was lying on her side, facing the room, and he could tell by her breathing and by the way she held herself that she was awake and thinking. She'd been quiet since he came back with the heater. Not the strained quiet of the first day, not the CEO trying to identify levers and finding none. A different quiet. The kind that settled in when a person had run out of the energy it took to process things and was just sitting with them instead. After a while she said, quietly enough not to wake Harper, the living room, "You were sitting in that chair 2 hours ago." "Yes." "If we hadn't," she stopped. "We were in here," Logan said. "That's what matters." "I know. She paused. "Keep running the tape back." "Don't," he said it without sharpness. Running the tape back on something that didn't happen is a way to scare yourself without any of the useful information. He paused. "I learned that one the hard way." She turned her head slightly to look at him. He was visible in the low amber light of the camp heater, sitting against the bed frame with his arms resting on his knees. He hadn't slept. She doubted he was planning to. "What time is it?" she asked. 20 past midnight. "You should sleep." "I'll sleep when the temperature stabilizes." She looked at him for a long moment. "Has it?" "Getting there." It was, as far as she could tell, not quite the truth. The room was cold in the way that got into the joints her ankle throbbed with it, and her injured arm, which had been more manageable during the day, had developed a deep ache that she suspected had less to do with the injury itself and more to do with the way cold settled into damaged tissue and made itself at home. She'd had one of the 2 pain relievers Logan had allocated for the evening, and she wasn't going to ask for the second. She pushed herself carefully to sitting, moving slowly, favoring the arm. Logan looked at her, but didn't tell her to lie back down. "The shed," she said. "You mentioned the wood stove in the shed. Iron unit small, but it drafts well. If the propane starts getting low, I'll shift us in there." "How connected is the shed to the cabin?" "There's a covered passage. 6 feet. I built it the second winter, didn't want to cross open ground to get to the tools in bad weather." He paused. "It's not heated, but it's out of the wind. 2 minutes to move everyone." She nodded, processed. "You built it yourself." "Most of this cabin is something I built or rebuilt myself." She looked around the bedroom. At the window frame, solid and well fitted. At the door, which hung true in its frame and latched properly. At the baseboard, where the wall met the floor, sealed tight. "You're good at it," she said. "It's not complicated. Just takes patience and the willingness to redo things that aren't right." He paused. Most people are in too much of a hurry to redo things that aren't right. She thought about 12 floors of office space in a Denver high-rise, designed by an architectural firm that charged more per hour than Logan made in a week. She thought about the executive suite she'd barely slept in for the first year after Wesley died. Beautiful, functional, completely hollow. "I've been in too much of a hurry for most of the last decade," she said. Logan didn't respond to that immediately. He was listening to something she'd noticed this about him. The way he tracked the ambient sounds of the cabin, the way other people tracked faces in a room. "Temperature's stable," he said, 52. "Is that good?" "It's not worse. That's good enough for now." She shifted against the headboard, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Harper made a small sound in her sleep and didn't wake. "She talks in her sleep sometimes," Logan said quietly. "Usually it's math. I've heard her working through multiplication tables at 2 in the morning." Celeste looked at the sleeping child. "She's remarkable." "She is," he said it simply. "She's also 9, and she's had 4 years of not easy, exactly. But she's built for it. She's got more interior life than most adults I've known." "She got that from you." He looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "'Cause you have more interior life than anyone I've met in years, and you show about 10% of it." She paused. "The other 90 is visible if you watch long enough." "I've been watching for 3 days." Logan held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked back at the heater. "Sarah had it too," he said. "Quality. Harper got it from both of us, probably. Or it skipped the complicated middle step and went directly from the concept to the kid." "Tell me about her," Celeste said, "if you want to." He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to. Then he said, "She was a high school English teacher. In Creston, same school Harper goes to now. Which is strange. Sometimes Harper has her mother's teachers. Some of them still talk about her." He paused. "She was funny. Genuinely funny, not performed funny. She could make a gas station attendant laugh in 30 seconds. She could also be stubborn in a way that was absolutely infuriating and also completely consistent, which is its own kind of integrity." Celeste listened. She was sick for 8 months. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late because she kept putting off the appointment. He said this without inflection, but something in the way he stopped, just briefly, between late and because told her what that cost him. By the time they found it, the options were limited. She did the treatment. She hated the treatment. She made jokes about the treatment that were terrible and also very funny. He paused. She died in March. That April, Harper started first grade, and she was the only kid in the class whose mother wasn't at the door. The room was very still. "I'm sorry," Celeste said. She'd said it once before, the second day, quickly and awkwardly. She meant it more now. 4 years, Logan said. "It gets not easier, exactly. Just further back. Most days it's just there. Like a piece of furniture you've stopped consciously looking at, but you'd notice immediately if it was gone." "And the guilt?" He looked at her sharply, not angry. Surprised. "You mentioned it," she said carefully. "That first evening. You said you'd handled situations most people couldn't imagine, and then you couldn't." She stopped. "Savor," he said. "Yes." He looked at the heater for a long time. "There's a version of that story where it makes no sense. She had cancer. I'm not an oncologist. Nothing I could have done militarily or mechanically or any other way was relevant." He paused. "But there's another version where I was gone for 11 years running into places other people couldn't handle, and then when it mattered most, in my own house, with my own family, I didn't know what to do. I sat in hospital waiting rooms, and I didn't know what to do. That's the part I still carry." Celeste looked at him. "That's not guilt about failing her," she said. "That's grief about being human." He looked back at her. Something moved through his expression that she couldn't fully read, not agreement, not disagreement, but something in between, the way a person looked when they heard a thing that might be true and weren't sure yet whether they were ready to let it be. "Maybe," he said. "Wesley died in a hospital," Celeste said. "I was in a board meeting. His assistant called my assistant. I found out through 2 layers of other people." She paused. "I've never told anyone that. Everyone thinks I was with him." Logan said nothing. He waited. "I wasn't. I was on the 32nd floor presenting Q3 projections." She looked at her hands. "By the time I got there, It had already happened. And I stood in that hallway, and I thought the last thing I said to him that morning was that I needed the risk assessment report by Thursday. She stopped. That was the last conversation. Celeste. I know it wasn't my fault. I know there's nothing I could have done even if I'd been there. She looked up. But I've spent 3 years building something enormous in his name, and I couldn't tell you right now whether I'm honoring him or just trying to go back and fix Thursday. Logan looked at her steadily. You can't fix Thursday. I know you know. I'm just saying it out loud. Sometimes it helps to hear someone else say it. He paused. You can't fix Thursday, and you can't unmiss the appointment, and I can't unspend those 11 years gone. That's just the shape of it. She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. The heater's flame indicator glowed amber between them, the only light in the room now, except for a thin edge of moonlight finding its way around the window's edge. The IPO, she said. What about it? The board's been pushing for 2 years. The market timing is their right, objectively. Everything lines up. She paused. But every time we get close to moving on it, I find a reason to delay. New risk to assess. New market condition to wait on. And they keep saying I'm being too cautious, and I keep saying I'm being prudent, and the truth is. She stopped. You don't want to do it, Logan said. She was quiet. Or you don't want to do it the way they want to do it, he said. Which might be different. She looked at him. He was watching her with the same quality of attention. Harper had quiet and from the side, not pressing, just present. The kind of attention that most people didn't know how to maintain because it required not filling the silence. Wesley's vision for the company was never about scale, she said. It was about the work. The actual technical work infrastructure that made things more reliable, more accessible. He used to say the best software was the software nobody noticed because it never broke. She paused. Public company with a board of 20 and quarterly earnings calls and analysts tracking every executive move that's not what he built. What I've been allowing it to become. What would he say about it? She laughed, short and wry. He'd say I was overthinking it and also that I was completely right. He had a gift for being on both sides of an argument simultaneously. That's a good quality. It was infuriating. And yes, she paused. He'd also say that running away from the decision by driving into a blizzard was not a strategy. And yet, she looked at the window. Outside, the snow had stopped. Could see stars, just a few, through the ragged gap in the clouds. I don't know what I want the company to be anymore. I know what I don't want it to be. I'm not sure I know what I want my life to be, which is a strange thing to realize at 30 years old. Not strange, Logan said. Just honest. She looked back at him. He was watching the heater now, and the amber light caught the line of his jaw and the tiredness in his face, not the tiredness of one night, but the accumulated kind, the kind that lived in a person. He looked like someone who had been carrying something for a long time and had gotten good enough at it that he'd stopped noticing the weight, the way you stopped noticing your own heartbeat. Logan, she said. He looked up. Thank you, she said. Not for the rescue, for this. For not pretending any of this is simpler than it is. He held her gaze for a moment. You didn't need someone to pretend it was simple, he said. You needed someone to sit in it with you. Yes, she said quietly. I did. Something settled between them. Not resolved, nothing was resolved. The roof was still collapsed, and the temperature was still 52 degrees, and the road was still closed. But settled the way things sometimes settled when two people stopped pretending to each other and just were. In the same room, with the same cold and the same amber light and the same weight of their own particular histories. Harper sighed in her sleep and said distinctly, the answer is 48. Celeste looked at her. Logan looked at her. Multiplication, he said. 6 times 8, Celeste said. She's been stuck on it for a week. Celeste looked at the sleeping child for a long moment. Then she looked at Logan. Something in her expression that she didn't try to put away. She's going to be okay, she said. Whatever you're worried about, with her. She's going to be okay. It was his turn to look at her steadily. He said, how do you know? Because she gave her coat to a stranger in a blizzard without being asked. And then she said goodnight to that stranger like it was ordinary. That's not something you teach. That's something a child absorbs from the person raising them. Logan looked at his daughter for a moment. He didn't say anything. He looked back at the heater, and something in his face had changed slightly, around the edges, the way wood changes in the presence of heat without visibly moving. The temperature held through the first part of the night, then began to drop again around 3 in the morning. Not dramatically 3 degrees in 90 minutes, but Logan tracked it, and the tracking told him that the hallway door was losing the argument with the cold air pushing through from the collapsed living room. He made 2 adjustments to the heater settings and added the last of the moving blankets to the gap under the door, and that bought another hour. By 4:15, he was running the numbers again, and the numbers were not settling the way he wanted them to. He'd been awake for 22 hours. He was aware of this in a functional way, aware that his decision-making quality was declining at a rate he could measure, but not fully compensate for, aware that the physical tiredness was something he could manage for another few hours before it became relevant. He'd run longer on worse, but he'd also learned that operating at the edge of his limits in a situation where other people's safety was, the variable was a specific kind of stress that the body registered whether or not the mind acknowledged it. He was sitting against the wall now, having given his position against the bed frame to Celeste when she'd shifted over to make room for Harper without waking her. Celeste had been asleep for an hour, finally, fitfully, her breathing evening out slowly the way it did when the body overruled the mind. He watched the temperature on the small gauge he'd mounted on the bed frame in winter, a habit he'd started after Harper's first serious fever, and never stopped. 47 degrees. He looked at Celeste. Her color was wrong. Not dramatically, he wouldn't have noticed if he hadn't been watching carefully and if he hadn't known what to look for. But the pallor had deepened from the manageable kind to something that reminded him of the ditch on Route 9, and the way she was breathing still, even, but shallower than it had been an hour ago. Slightly labored at the edges was a pattern he recognized. Crossed to the bed and put his hand on her forehead. Cold. The skin had the beginning of the waxy quality that hypothermia brought in, when the body started pulling heat away from the surface to protect the core. Her hands on top of the blanket were nearly white. Celeste. He kept his voice low, even direct. The voice from dozens of situations where panic was the enemy and clarity was the only tool. Celeste, open your eyes. Celeste. Firmer. Put his hand on her shoulder and pressed. I need you to open your eyes. A sound, low, slow, her eyelids moved. Didn't open. He made a decision in the time it took to draw one breath. He pulled back the blanket on one side and lay down beside her, on the bed, pulling the blankets back over both of them, pressing his arm against her back and pulling her into the warmth of his own body. It was a clinical decision, the most efficient way to transfer core heat to someone who was losing it faster than the ambient environment could compensate. He'd read it in the wilderness medical manual he kept in the hall closet. He'd also done it before, in a different country, with a different injured person, with far less complicated feelings about the situation. Celeste's body registered the heat before she did. He felt her muscles, which had been held in the unconscious tension of cold, begin to release fractionally. He pulled the blankets tighter over her shoulder and pressed his hand flat against her arm and talked to her quietly, steadily, the way he'd talked to Harper through nightmares, not saying anything in particular, just maintaining the thread of his voice. You're okay. You're warming up. I've got you. Harper, on the other side of the bed, was generating her own heat reliably children burned hot. Another thing Logan knew from experience, and the combined warmth inside the blankets, was already shifting the math in a direction he liked better. After maybe 10 minutes, Celeste's eyes opened. Fully this time. She looked at the ceiling. Then she seemed to become aware of the warmth against her back, and she was still for a moment in the way of someone locating themselves in space and time. You're cold, Logan said. Hypothermia starting. I needed to get your temperature up. Quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Her voice was rough and small. Is it working? Yes, good. She closed her eyes again. Then, after a pause, this is not how I expected to spend Thursday. It's Friday, he said, even better. He almost laughed. He kept his hand flat and warm against her arm and didn't move. Logan, she said. Yeah, tell me something. She said it the way people said things when they were very tired and the normal barriers were down. Something true. Something you don't usually say. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the stars he'd seen through the window earlier were gone, clouds coming back, or the angle of the moon shifting, or just the mountain doing what mountains did. He could hear the wind in the trees, but not against the walls anymore. "I don't miss the missions," he said. "I thought I would. For a long time, I thought the missing would be the thing that kept me from being here properly. But it's not the missions I miss." He paused. "I miss having a purpose that was bigger than the day. Something that the day was in service of." He paused again. "I've been building that here. With Harper. With this place. But some days it's still. Some days it feels like I left the best version of myself somewhere I can't get back to." Celeste was quiet. "That's honest," she said. "You asked for honest." "I did." She shifted slightly. Her color, which he was still tracking even in the dark, was better. "I think the best version of yourself is probably not a version you left somewhere," she said. "I think it might be the version that's sitting here telling me the truth at 4 in the morning." He looked at the ceiling. "Considered that." "Maybe," he said. "You said that before." "It's still the right answer." She made a sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh, too tired to complete itself. Then she said, "Tell me about the mountains before this week. What you actually like about living here." It was such a specific and unexpected question that it caught him off guard. Most people asked about the isolation or the winters, or how he managed with a child so far from anything. Nobody asked what he liked. "The light," he said. "In October especially. There's about 3 weeks in October when the aspen trees go gold, and in the afternoon that light comes through them and hits the granite on the upper peaks, and the whole world looks like something that can't be real." He paused. "Harper and I drive up to the upper trailhead on the weekends in October just to sit in it. That sounds like something worth living here for." "It is," he paused. "Also the dark. In summer, on clear nights, you can see the Milky Way from the back porch. The whole band of it. I grew up in North Carolina, and I never saw it like this until I came out west." "Do you take Harper?" "She's the one who reminds me to look." Celeste was quiet for a moment. "She's going to be remarkable," she said. "When she grows up, she's already remarkable." "Yes," Celeste said. "But in 20 years, she's going to be extraordinary." Logan looked at his daughter, sleeping on the other side of the bed. Quiet certainty of her breathing. The way she'd solved for 6 times 8 in her sleep. "I know," he said. "And then, because it was 4 in the morning and the barriers were down on both sides, I'm glad you survived the ditch." Celeste was quiet for a long moment. He thought she might have fallen back asleep. Then she said, "I'm glad you saw the taillights." Her breathing evened out, deepened. The waxy pallor was gone from her skin. The hand on top of the blanket had gone from white to something closer to its natural color. He didn't move. He kept his hand on her arm and watched the temperature gauge. 49, 50, 51. He tracked it the way he tracked everything steadily, without letting the relief of the upward movement make him less careful. He didn't sleep. The night went by in the particular way nights went when you were the person responsible for the darkness, not quickly, not slowly, but with a kind of granular attention to each of its sections. The hours from 4 to 6 were the hardest. They always were. Something about that particular stretch made the mind run its worst scenarios, and he'd learned not to argue with the scenarios, but to let them play out and then assess them. He was good at assessment. He'd been trained in it, and then he'd lived into it for 12 years, and then he'd applied it to gutters and roof lines and a child's fever and the math of propane canisters. He thought about what Celeste had said, that the best version of himself might be this version present, honest, sitting with things as they were. He'd heard versions of that idea before. From Carol, from the counselor the VA had sent him to twice, from a teammate who'd made it out of the same situation. Logan had chosen a completely different response. He'd heard it and filed it under possibly true but not yet useful. It was strange to hear it from someone who had no investment in him at all, a stranger who'd been in his truck for 12 minutes before he'd known her name. He thought about Sarah. He thought about her, the way he thought about her most nights, not with the acute grief of the first years, but with the settled weight of someone who was simply part of the structure of him, load-bearing in ways that wouldn't show until they were gone. She would have liked Celeste. She would have had opinions about her specific, trenchant opinions, delivered in that particular voice she used when she'd made up her mind about a person, and she would have been right, the way she was right about most people she formed opinions about. She would also have told him to sleep, in that voice. He didn't sleep. Around 6:15, the light changed. Just slightly, the window went from black to the particular dark blue that preceded dawn at this elevation. And then, over the following 40 minutes, shifted through gray toward something almost white. The snow on the window's exterior caught the light and held it. The room, which had been entirely amber and shadow all night, became something else. Gray-blue and cold-looking, even though the temperature had held. He got up carefully and went to the window and looked out. The snow had stopped. He could tell before he fully processed the visual the sound had changed, or rather the absence of sound. No wind against the north wall, no movement in the trees, just the complete and total silence that followed a Colorado storm like a held breath. The sky above the tree line was the color of old pewter going pale, and to the east, over the ridge, there was the first thin suggestion of light. He stood at the window for a moment. Behind him, Celeste spoke. "Is it over?" He turned. She was awake, sitting up. She'd pulled the blanket around her shoulders. Her hair was coming loose, and there were marks on her face from the pillow, and she looked nothing like the woman on the magazine covers he'd eventually, in the small hours, allowed himself to wonder about. She looked like someone who had been through several things in succession and was still here. "Storm's over," he said. "Sky's clear." She looked at the window. The light was strengthening, slowly. "The roads," she said, "still have to clear, but clear sky means the crews can work." He paused. "Could be today. Could be tomorrow morning. But we're on the right side of it now." She looked at him. He was standing in the morning light from the window, still in the same clothes from the night before, not having slept, and she suspected none of that was news to him. "You stayed up all night," she said. "I was monitoring your temperature. And you do that by lying awake, watching it, generally." She held his gaze. Something in her expression that was direct without being uncomfortable, the look of someone who had decided to stop managing the distance between them. "Logan," she said. "Yeah. When they come to get me," she stopped. Started again. "When the road opens and the rescue comes. I'm going to give you my number. My actual number. Not my assistant's number. Not the main line." She paused. "I've never given that number to someone I met less than a week ago." He held her gaze. "Okay," he said. "I don't know what happens after that. I'm not going to pretend I do. I'm not asking you to. But I want—" She paused, and for the first time since he'd carried her out of the ditch, she looked slightly uncertain. Not frightened. Just human. "I want to find out." Logan looked at her in the morning light, at the way she was sitting in the cold, with her injured arm and her wrapped ankle, and her hair falling down, and 3 days of a collapsed cabin, and a near hypothermic night behind her, and the look on her face was the most unguarded thing he'd seen in 4 days. He said, "I want to find out too." Harper's voice came from beside them, utterly awake, and apparently having been so for some time. "Find out what?" They both looked at her. She was lying on her side, completely alert, with the particular expression of a child who had heard more than she'd indicated. "Whether the road's going to open today or tomorrow," Logan said, without missing a beat. Harper looked at him, looked at Celeste, looked at Logan again. "That's probably not what you meant," she said, "but okay." Then she sat up, pulled the blanket around her shoulders, looked at the pale light coming through the window, and said with complete practical focus, "Is there anything left for breakfast? Or did the collapse get the kitchen too?" "Kitchen's fine," Logan said. "Can we have eggs?" "We can have eggs." "Okay." She looked at Celeste. "Do you like your eggs scrambled or fried? Because Dad only knows scrambled, but I know both." Celeste looked at the child, at Logan, back at Harper. "Scrambled is perfect," she said. "Good choice," Harper said, in the tone of someone for whom this confirmed something important. Climbed out of the bed, blanket trailing behind her like a cape, and headed for the kitchen with the folks of someone who had decided that morning was happening, regardless of what the mountain had done to the night. Logan watched her go. He looked back at Celeste. She was watching Harper, and the expression on her face was the same one he'd noticed at the card table 2 nights ago, that unguarded, slightly surprised itself look. The one that had nothing to do with boardrooms or valuations, or the carefully maintained composure of a CEO who had taught herself to run at full speed so she wouldn't have to feel what came in when she slowed down. Turned and found him watching. Neither of them looked away. Outside, the sun broke the ridge line to the east and hit the snow-covered mountain, and the whole world went white and brilliant and temporary, the way beauty was always temporary, the way most things worth having were sudden and present and asking only to be looked at while they lasted. Logan went to help Harper with the eggs. The eggs were slightly overcooked because Harper got distracted explaining to Celeste how the camp stove worked differently from the kitchen range, and Logan ate his without comment, and Celeste ate hers without comment, and Harper ate hers while talking continuously about the differences between cast iron and stainless steel heat distribution, which she had opinions about that she'd developed by watching cooking videos on Logan's laptop during the winter months when outdoor options were limited. It was in its way the most ordinary breakfast any of them had eaten in days. The morning light through the kitchen window was the hard, clean kind that followed mountain storms, the kind that made everything look freshly cut, every edge precise, every shadow exact. The snow outside was unbroken in every direction, 3 feet deep on the flat ground and deeper where it had drifted, and it caught the light and threw it back doubled. Logan had been out to check the equipment shed at first light, and the structure was sound. The passage connecting it to the cabin was intact. The wood stove inside had been lit for an hour, and the shed was, if not warm, at least survivable in a way that the cabin's front half was not. The cabin's front half was a problem he was going to have to look at squarely at some point, but not this morning. He listened to Harper explain cast iron, and watched Celeste listen with the same complete attention. She brought to everything not performed interest, but actual engagement, kind that asked follow-up questions because it wanted to know the answers. Harper noticed. Logan noticed her noticing. After breakfast, he went outside with a shovel and worked on clearing the debris from the collapsed section, not to fix it, that was a week's work in good weather, but to assess it and to keep his hands moving while he thought. The living room was gone. The structural beams had failed at the joints, which meant the original construction had been the weak point, not the snow load specifically. He'd suspected this for 2 winters and had planned to reinforce the joints in spring. He hadn't gotten to it. He stood in the collapsed space with cold air coming down through the open roof and looked at where his chair had been. He looked at where the couch had been. He looked at the photograph, still buried under a compressed block of snow and debris, and he thought about going after it and decided it would keep. Sarah was not in the photograph. She was in other places in the way Harper held her fork, in the muscle memory of a lemon cake recipe that Logan still made wrong every time because he kept omitting the step he found unnecessary, in the particular way sunset light came through the kitchen window in late spring and made the whole room the color of something warm. Came back inside through the kitchen. Celeste was at the table with a notepad she'd found in the kitchen drawer, a paper one, spiral-bound, the kind Logan used for grocery lists and hardware orders, and she was writing something. She looked up when he came in, and there was a quality of focus on her face that he recognized, someone who had been thinking hard about something, and was now trying to get it down before the clarity dissipated. "Paper," he said. "Old school. My phone's dead and my laptop's in the SUV under 4 feet of snow." She looked at the notepad. "I used to do everything on paper, before Wesley and I got the first round of funding, and suddenly everything was digital and tracked and archived." She paused. There was something about paper, the way you couldn't just delete it. Logan poured himself coffee and sat across from her. "What are you working on?" She looked at what she'd written. A letter to the board. She paused. "Or the beginning of one." "I'm not sure it's a letter yet. It might just be thinking out loud." He didn't ask what it said. She didn't offer. After a moment she said, "I've been running the company," as though the size of it was the proof that I did it right. Like if it got big enough, that would mean something. That it justified, she stopped. But Wesley never cared about the size. Cared about whether it worked. Whether it did the thing it was supposed to do, and whether the people building it were treated like people. She looked up. "I've got 900 employees. I know the names of maybe 60 of them." "How many did you know when you started?" "All of them." 11. She looked at the notepad. "Somewhere between 11 and 900, I stopped being the person who knew everyone and became the person that everyone else knew. And I let that happen because it felt like growing up. Like what success was supposed to look like." She paused. Wesley would have kept knowing all of them. He would have found a way. "You're not Wesley," Logan said. Not unkindly, just plainly. She looked at him. "No. You're also not the person who needs to decide anything today. Or this week. He wrapped his hands around his mug. You've been running on emergency response mode for 4 days. That's not the state to make permanent decisions from. I know that, but you're doing it anyway. She looked at him for a moment. Then, I've been making decisions in emergency mode for 3 years. I'm not sure I know what the other mode feels like anymore. Logan considered that. It feels slower, he said, and quieter. And sometimes you think something's wrong because nothing's urgent. He paused. Nothing's actually wrong. You just forgot what the baseline felt like. She was quiet, looking at him. Then she picked up the pen again. How long did it take you to find the baseline again? I'm still finding it, he said. Some days I think I've got it, and then Harper has a bad night, and I spend some 6 hours running worst-case scenarios, and then she's fine in the morning, and I realize I spent 6 hours on nothing. He paused. But the gap between the bad nights is getting longer. So she wrote something on the notepad. He didn't look at what it was. He got up and went to check the heater in the back bedroom, and when he came back through, she was still writing, and the pen was moving faster. He left her to it. The radio signal came back properly at 10:30, not the fragmented, static-heavy version of the previous days, but a clear transmission from the county emergency management station, reading out road conditions in the flat, just voice of someone who had been doing this for many winters. Route 9 South section, open as of 800. Route 9 North section, mile markers 12 through 22, plows actively working. Estimated clearance between 1,400 and 1,600 hours. Logan listened to the whole broadcast twice. Then he went to find Celeste. She was in the equipment shed with Harper, who had decided that the shed was more interesting than the damaged cabin and had migrated there with her blanket and her library book and the deck of cards, which she was using to build something structural on the workbench rather than play with. Celeste was sitting in the camp chair Logan used when he worked on small engine repairs, her wrapped ankle propped on an overturned bucket, and they were talking about something that stopped when Logan came through the passage door, not guiltily, just naturally, the way conversations paused when a third person arrived. Road crews are working the northern section, Logan said. Celeste absorbed this. Something moved across her face relief, and something that was not quite relief, both at the same time. This afternoon, she said. Between 2 and 4, they said. Harper looked up from her card structure. She's leaving today? Probably. Harper looked at her cards, moved one carefully. Okay, she said, in the voice she used when something was not okay, and she had decided to manage it alone. Logan watched his daughter for a moment. Then he looked at Celeste, who was also watching Harper, with an expression that was careful and quiet, and he thought understood something about what was happening in that small face and was choosing not to press on it. I should call my office, Celeste said, if there's signal. Try near the north window. You might get enough. She took his phone, hers was dead, and the charger for it was in the SUV, buried under the snow, which was probably fine because there was likely no service to charge toward, and managed to get 1 bar near the window, which was enough. Logan didn't listen. He went to make sure the borrowed supplies were organized, and to think about the practical business of getting Celeste into a vehicle when she couldn't walk properly, and to give her the privacy of a phone call that was going to be, at minimum, complicated. He could hear her voice through the wall, not the words, just the tone. She started measured and professional, and then shifted into something more direct, and then there was a long silence in which someone else was talking, and then Celeste's voice came back sharp for a few words, and then settled. Then she laughed, briefly, which surprised him enough that he paused with a blanket in his hands. When she came back to the shed, she handed him the phone. My assistant, she said. She managed everything, including rescheduling 4 meetings, handling 2 board inquiries, and apparently talking the risk assessment team through the acquisition review herself. She paused. She's 24. You said she was going to figure it out. I said you said that. And Celeste looked at him. And you were right, which I find predictable at this point. I'm not right about everything. Name one thing you've been wrong about this week. He thought about it. I underestimated how much wood I'd burn with 3 people in the shed. Stared at him. Then she laughed, the real one, unguarded, slightly surprised at itself. He'd heard it 4 times now, and he was aware that he'd started keeping count, which was information he wasn't going to look at too closely. "Your assistant," he said. "What's her name?" "Miriam." Celeste paused. "She asked if I was okay." That was the first thing she said, before anything about the company. "Are you okay?" She paused again. "I've been treating her like a function rather than a person." For 8 months. She looked at her notepad, which she'd brought with her to the shed. "That's going in the letter, too." Logan went back to the blanket he'd been folding. "What's the letter actually about?" She was quiet for a moment. "It's about what the company is going to be when I get back. And what I'm going to be in it." She paused. "The IPO is off the table. Not permanently maybe, but not now. Not on the board's timeline. We're going to table it for 18 months and spend that time getting the company back to what it was supposed to be." She looked at the notepad. "I'm also going to hire a CEO." Logan looked up. "Not resign," she said, reading his expression. "Hire one. I'm going to stay as Chief Innovation Officer. Focus on the technical work." She paused. "The work I actually know how to do. The work Wesley and I built the thing to do." She looked at her hands. Running a 900-person company and actually building good technology are two different jobs. I've been doing both badly by doing both at once. "That sounds like something you've known for a while," Logan said. "I've known it for 2 years, she said. "I didn't know what to do with knowing it." She paused. "Apparently what I needed was 4 days trapped in a collapsed cabin in Colorado. Most people use therapy. I've tried therapy. And my therapist told me I was using work to avoid grief, and I said interesting point and then booked 3 more meetings." She looked at him levelly. "You were more effective. I didn't do anything. You sat with me in the dark and told me the truth," she said. "That's not nothing." The shed was warm now. The small cast-iron stove had brought it up to something like 60 degrees, and the light through the one window was full and bright. Harper had abandoned the card structure and was lying on her stomach on the workbench, reading her book, her feet in the air, utterly removed from the conversation in the way of children who were in fact paying close attention. "Harper," Logan said. She looked up with exaggerated casualness. "Come help me figure out how to get Celeste into the truck when the road opens. She can't manage the step with the ankle." Harper closed her book. This was apparently a problem she was interested in solving. She slid off the workbench and came over with the focused look she wore when something practical was at stake, and the 3 of them spent 20 minutes engineering a solution involving the running board, the door handle, and a specific sequence of weight distribution that Celeste practiced twice on a low stool before she was satisfied she had it. It was, Logan thought, watching them work it out, Harper demonstrating, Celeste following instructions with the earnest concentration she brought to anything she was learning. It was the most normal 20 minutes of the entire week. The most ordinary. And somehow for that reason the most something. He didn't have a word for it. He had the feeling, which would have to be sufficient. The helicopter arrived at 1:30. Logan heard it before he saw it, the particular frequency of the rotors, lower and more regular than a news or weather helicopter. The sound of something with a purpose and a specific destination. He was outside assessing what remained of the north roof section when the sound came over the ridge from the south, and he tracked it without moving until the aircraft came into view over the tree line. County search and rescue helicopter, dark red, running low and deliberate. They'd been sweeping the northern section, he guessed, checking on structures and checking for anyone who hadn't made it out before the road closures. It would have been Ray who called it in Ray, knowing that Logan was somewhere up here with a 9-year-old and no communication, and that the cabin was on the county's structure list. Ray being Ray, which meant quiet and practical and thinking 2 steps ahead without ever saying so. The helicopter circled once, saw his truck, saw the collapsed roof section, descended toward the flat ground 60 yards east of the cabin, where the snow was deep and undisturbed, and there was room to land. Logan went back inside to tell Celeste. She was in the shed, actually standing, carefully, with one crutch, testing her weight on the ankle with the tentative precision of someone who had been lying to herself about how much it hurt, and was now revising the assessment. She looked up when he came through the passage. "Search and rescue," he said. "They're landing in the east field." Something moved across her face. He watched it, the relief, the complicated thing underneath the relief, the particular expression of someone who had been existing inside a suspended moment and could feel the moment ending. "Okay," she said. "They'll have a proper medical kit. They can splint the ankle correctly and assess the arm." He paused. "They'll take you down to Creston, and from there you can get a car or a flight out." "I know," she said. "I know the logistics." She paused. "That's not what I'm—" She stopped. "I know," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. Harper appeared in the passage doorway behind Logan, coat on, hood up, looking between them with those quiet, dark eyes. She'd brought the deck of cards, which she was holding in both hands. She didn't say anything. Celeste reached into the notepad she'd been carrying since morning and tore out a page. She folded it once and held it out to Logan. "That's my number. The actual one. And my personal email." She paused. "And what the letter says, in case you ever want to know what became of it." He took the paper, folded it again without opening it, and put it in his jacket pocket. "You don't want to read it?" she said. "I'll read it later."
I'm not most people.
"No," she said. "You're not." Outside, the helicopter's rotors were slowing to idle they'd landed, which meant the crew was already moving toward the cabin. Logan could hear the crunch of boots in the snow. He helped Celeste through the passage into the cabin kitchen, through the kitchen to the back door, and out into the snow. The cold hit them both. The sky above was the particular blue that only existed at elevation in winter, a deep saturated blue that seemed to have been created for the specific purpose of contrast with the white below it. The helicopter sat in the east field, red against the snow, and 2 crew members were already crossing the field toward them.
Moving quickly.
"Sir." The lead crew member, a woman in her late 30s, short dark hair, professional and efficient, addressed Logan first.
"You reported an injured party?"
"She has a sprained ankle, probable fracture, possible radial fracture in the left forearm, and a head wound that's been monitored for concussion. Core temp is stable as of this morning." He gave her the timeline, the assessments, the treatments, in the compressed, efficient language he'd used for similar reports in completely different contexts. Crew member listened, nodded, made 2 quick notes. "You do this professionally?" she asked. "Used to," Logan said. She moved to Celeste and began a proper assessment, and Celeste submitted to it with the patience of someone who had been through several days of improvised but competent medical care and understood the difference between that and the professional version. The second crew member was speaking into a radio. Harper came to stand beside Logan. She was watching the helicopter with the expression she wore, around things she found interesting and didn't yet know how to feel about. Her hand found his without looking for it, just moved sideways and fit into his the way it had been doing, since she was small enough that his hand was a quarter of her body. He held it. "Is she going to be okay?" Harper asked. She meant the ankle. She also didn't mean the ankle. "Yes," he said. "Is she going to—" Harper stopped. Reformulated. "Will we see her again?" Logan looked at his daughter. At the question behind the question, which Harper was asking directly because she was 9, and still had the directness of someone who hadn't learned yet to approach important things from the side. "I think so," he said. "I hope so." Harper looked at Celeste, who was talking to the crew member now answering questions, her posture straightening slightly from the practiced composure she'd dropped over the course of 4 days. She looked, at a distance, like the person in the magazine covers that Logan had eventually, in the small hours of the previous night, allowed himself to think about. Straight-shouldered, precise, controlled. But Harper had been in the shed with her for 3 hours. Harper had watched her practice the truck step sequence with complete earnestness. Harper had watched her listen to the cast iron versus stainless steel monologue without a single glance at the phone that didn't work anyway. Harper was 9, and she had her mother's eyes, and she kept her own counsel, but she kept it with everything she observed, which was everything. "Okay," Harper said. Then she leaned slightly against Logan's arm in the way she did, sometimes not seeking comfort exactly, just making contact, just affirming that they were both standing in the same place on the same ground. They watched the crew stabilize Celeste's ankle in a proper support boot and check the arm and clear her for transport. One of the crew members went back to the helicopter for a carry bag, and Logan saw Celeste say something to stop them, pointing at the crutch, indicating she preferred to move herself. Crew member deferred. Celeste made her way across the snow on the crutch. with a careful focus that was still underneath everything. The same person who had looked at Logan from the back seat of his truck and tried to find the levers that would give her control of the situation. Some things were consistent. He found he was glad of it. She stopped in front of him. The crew member had given them a few feet of space. Logan appreciated that. The truck step, Celeste said. We practiced the sequence. If you end up needing it, I will need it. My car is under snow and the helicopter doesn't take ground passengers. She stopped. She'd been talking to Phil something, and she knew it. She looked at him directly. I don't do this well, she said. Leaving things open, unresolved. I know, but I can't resolve this one right now. And I know that. I know you know, he said. It was the same thing he'd said to her in the dark, the same cadence, and she heard it, he could tell by the small shift in her expression. Call me, she said. Not next week. Not don't wait until you've decided what to do with the fact that you want to. Just call me, he looked at her. Okay, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked down at Harper, who was looking up at her with the calm assessment of someone who had been forming opinions for 3 days and was confident in them. Celeste crouched slightly awkward with the ankle, catching herself with the crutch to get more level with Harper. Thank you, she said. For the coat. The first night. Harper looked at her seriously. You needed it, I did. Celeste paused. And for the eggs. Both times. The second ones were better. The stove in the shed runs hot. They were. Significantly. Celeste looked at the girl for a moment. Something in her face that was careful and genuine and not at all performed. You're very good at taking care of people, she said. You probably know that. Harper considered this. I try, she said. I got it from my mom mostly, but also from my dad. Celeste looked at Logan briefly, looked back at Harper. That makes sense, she said. Both of them. She straightened carefully and looked at Harper for another moment. I'll see you, Harper. Harper nodded. Then, in the voice she reserved for things she'd decided and was not going to negotiate, you should come back sometime. When the roads are normal, she paused. In October. Dad says the light is good in October. Celeste looked at Logan. He looked at his daughter, who had been lying on her back, looking at the ceiling for 3 days and listening to every word, and then had decided, in the way she decided everything, she knew what she thought. October, Celeste said. Okay. She turned and made her way toward the helicopter, the crew member falling in beside her, the snow crunching under the crutch and her good foot. Logan watched her go. Harper watched her go. At the edge of the east field, Celeste stopped and looked back. The distance was too far to read her expression clearly. But she looked back, and she held it for a moment, and then she turned and kept moving. The helicopter was in the air for 11 minutes before it disappeared over the southern ridge. Logan stood in the snow with Harper until the sound of the rotors was fully gone, replaced by the complete silence of a post-storm mountain afternoon. Then he looked down at his daughter. You okay? Yes, Harper said. Are you? Yes. They stood for another moment. Then Harper said, the cabin roof. I know. Is it fixable? The living room section needs to come down and be rebuilt. The bedroom and kitchen are sound. He looked back at the cabin. Collapsed north face, the ragged gap in the roofline, the sheer scale of the work involved. It's fixable. It'll take most of the spring. Harper looked at it too. Can we do it ourselves? Most of it. Ray will help with the structural beams. Okay. She was quiet for a moment. Dad, yeah. She looked up at him. When you rebuild it. Can we make the living room bigger? He looked at her. Why? She shrugged in the carefully casual way that meant she'd thought about this. It would be good to have more room, in case people come to visit. Like in October, for example. Logan looked at his daughter for a long moment. She held his gaze with the serene confidence of someone who had made her position clear and considered the matter handled. He thought about Sarah, who would have had opinions. He thought about them, and he thought about what they might have been, and he thought that they probably would have been the same as Harper's, delivered in a different voice and with more words. We could make it bigger, he said. Harper nodded, satisfied. Good. She turned back toward the cabin. We should check what food's left. And you should sleep. I'm fine. You were awake all night. I'm aware. Then you should sleep. She said it with the pragmatic authority of someone who had decided to manage something and was not interested in counter-arguments. She started back toward the cabin door. I'll check the food. You sleep for 2 hours, and then we'll figure out the roof assessment. Logan watched her go. She was 9 years old. She was wearing a coat that was slightly too big because she'd grown over the winter, and he hadn't gotten the new one yet. She walked with purpose, through the snow she'd been walking through her whole life, toward the partially destroyed cabin she'd been born into the family that owned. He stood in the cold for another moment. He put his hand in his jacket pocket and felt the folded piece of notepad paper. He thought about calling Celeste tonight, which was too soon. He thought about calling in a week, which felt calculated in a way that didn't suit either of them. He thought about what she'd said, don't wait until you've decided what to do with the fact that you want to. He thought about 4 days, and a collapsed roof and 51 degrees in the dark, and a woman who had asked him, at 4 a.m, to tell her something true. He went inside. He checked the food situation while Harper cleared space on the bedroom floor because the bed was the only appropriate sleeping surface now, and she was not going to use it when he was the one who'd been awake all night. And she was immovable on this point, in the way she was immovable on most points, which she had gotten from Sarah and also from him, and he had no complaints. He lay down on the bed at 2:40 in the afternoon, with the paper still in his jacket pocket, and he was asleep before he could think about anything else. He slept for 3 hours. He didn't dream, or if he did, he didn't remember it. When he woke, the light had shifted to the long, gold light of late afternoon, and Harper was in the doorway with 2 mugs of something hot, and through the window behind her, the mountain was exactly the color of everything worth coming back to. Coffee? Harper said. What's in the other mug? Hot chocolate. Mine. She held him out. Don't get any ideas. He sat up. Took the coffee. She came and sat on the end of the bed with her hot chocolate, and for a while they both just sat in the late light and didn't need to say anything. Then Harper said, You're going to call her. I'm thinking about it. Don't think too long. I know. I mean it, Dad. She looked at him over the rim of her mug. I really mean it. Logan looked at his daughter, at the person she was becoming quietly and completely in the space between one winter and the next. I know you do, he said. Outside, the sun was moving toward the western peaks, and the shadows of the pines were getting long across the snow. And the world was the particular beautiful it got to be, in the hour before dark, when the storm was gone and everything was still, and the question of what came next was still entirely open. Logan drank his coffee. He thought about a phone call. He thought about October. He called her 4 days later. Not because 4 days was the right amount of time, or because he'd calculated it. He called because Harper went back to school on Monday morning, and the cabin was quiet, in a way that had a specific quality to it, not the ordinary quiet of a house between a father and a daughter, which he'd come to know well enough that it felt like furniture. This was a different quiet, the kind that made you aware of its cause. He stood at the kitchen window, with the paper from his jacket pocket unfolded in his hand, and looked at the number for about 40 seconds. Then he dialed. She picked up on the second ring. I wasn't sure when you'd call, she said. No preamble. No hello, who is this? Because she'd clearly put his number in her phone. 4 days, he said. I noticed. A pause. How's the cabin? The living room section is coming down this week. Ray's coming Saturday to help with the beams. He looked through the kitchen doorway at the blocked hallway. The bedroom and kitchen are fine. We've been living in about 400 square feet. How does Harper feel about that? She's organized it more efficiently than I would have. There's a system, he paused. How's the ankle? Properly splinted. They want 6 weeks off it, which I've negotiated down to 4. She paused. My doctor used the word negotiated with a tone that indicated he did not find this charming. He's right, he is, she said. I'm working on it. It was strange, hearing her voice without being able to see her face. He'd spent 4 days reading her expressions, the careful ones and the unguarded ones, and the ones in between, and the voice alone was like reading a map without the terrain. He'd have to learn to fill in what he couldn't see. The letter, he said. The board. A pause. I sent it Monday morning. Formal version, not the notepad version. He could hear her breath shift slightly. The board chair called me immediately. He was not pleased. What did you say? I told him the decision was made and that we were going to spend the next 18 months making the company worth being proud of rather than worth the IPO valuation, and that if he wanted to discuss the distinction, I was available Thursday at 2. She paused. He didn't call back Thursday. Will he fight it? He'll try. He doesn't have the votes. She paused. I've been talking to the other board members directly. 3 of them told me privately they had reservations about the timeline anyway. She paused again. One of them said, and I am quoting directly, Celeste, I've been waiting 3 years for you to sound like yourself again. Logan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, how did that land? A long pause. It landed hard, she said, honestly. The way she said the honest things without softening them first. I didn't realize other people had been watching me disappear. People usually are, Logan said. We just don't talk about it, because it seems impolite. She laughed. The real one, brief and unguarded, and hearing it without seeing it, he had to construct it from memory, and he found that he could. I'm also hiring a CEO, she said. I've started the search. External candidate, I want someone who doesn't have 12 years of my habits baked into how they think about the company. She paused. Miriam is getting a significant raise and a proper title. How did she take it? She cried, very briefly. Then she apologized for crying. Then I told her to stop apologizing. It took about 4 minutes. Good 4 minutes. Yes, Celeste said quietly. It was. They talked for an hour. It was not a romantic conversation, or not only that it was 2 people picking up a thread that had started in a dark bedroom at 4 in the morning and continuing it in the daylight, finding that it held. They talked about the cabin rebuild and about the board and about Harper's math problem, which had apparently resolved itself because she'd come home from school Monday, announcing that 6 times 8 was definitively 48, and that her teacher had confirmed this, which Harper delivered as news rather than as the thing she'd been solving in her sleep for a week. They talked about Wesley, and about Sarah, and about the particular difficulty of building a life around a loss, and the moment when you realize the building has become the loss's container rather than its monument. They did not talk about what they were to each other. That question had its own timeline, and they both understood it. Before he hung up, Celeste said, October, he said. Harper picked the month, but I want you to know I'd have picked it too. He looked out the kitchen window at the snow-covered mountain, at the pines, at the flat gray sky of January that would, in 9 months, be the particular blue of a Colorado autumn afternoon with gold aspen light coming through it. I know, he said. The living room came down the following Saturday. Ray arrived at 7 in the morning with his truck, 2 come-alongs, a chainsaw, and his wife, Carol, who brought a casserole and the particular brand of practical warmth she'd been extending to Logan and Harper for 4 years. Carol hugged Harper immediately and at length. Harper permitted this with the tolerance of someone who had a complicated relationship with being hugged and had decided Carol was worth the exception. The demolition took most of the day. Logan and Ray worked the beams while Carol and Harper operated as the ground crew, clearing debris, sorting salvageable lumber from the unsalvageable, keeping the coffee coming. By 4 in the afternoon, what remained of the collapsed section was gone, and the opening was tarped and secured, and the cabin was smaller than it had been but structurally honest about what it was. Ray stood at the edge of what had been the living room and looked at the open sky through the tarp and said, "Foundation's good. You could go bigger. That's the plan," Logan said. Ray looked at him sideways. Logan had not explained the plan in detail. Bigger how? Maybe 400 square feet added on the west side. Living room, another bedroom. Ray calculated this with the expression he wore when he was running numbers and finding them reasonable. Be a full summer's work. I know. You got help lined up? Logan thought about it. Working on it, he said. Ray nodded once, in the way that meant he had questions he wasn't going to ask, and went to load the truck. Carol came to stand beside Logan. She was 61, had been a kindergarten teacher for 30 years, and had the particular quality of someone who understood people's inner states the way other people understood weather, not because she was told, but because she paid attention. Harper tells me you rescued someone in the storm, she said. She made it through the storm, Logan said. I just got her out of the ditch. Carol looked at him. That's not what Harper says. Logan didn't respond. Harper says, Carol continued, in the gentle, measured way she deployed when she wanted to make sure something landed, that the lady helped her with math, knows how scrambled eggs should taste, and is coming in October. She said that. She did, with considerable authority. Carol paused. I just want to say, and then I'll leave it alone, and I mean that it's good. Whatever it is, it's good. Logan looked at the tarped opening where the living room had been, at the space that would become something else. I know, he said. Carol went to help Ray with the truck. Logan stood there for another moment, and the light was going gold through the pines. And he thought about all the things a person built in their life, the deliberate ones and the ones that came from necessity, and the ones that showed up when you were trying to get home in a blizzard, and didn't know yet what they were going to become. He went inside to start dinner. Spring came the way it always did at that elevation, reluctantly, in stages, with several retreats back into winter before it committed. Logan worked the cabin rebuild around his county schedule, mornings and weekends, the methodical way he worked everything. He poured the foundation extension in April when the ground thawed enough. He framed the addition in May with Ray and a friend of Ray's who had done carpentry for 40 years and had opinions about everything but was also correct about most of it. Harper did her homework on the workbench in the equipment shed and periodically came out to observe and ask questions, which the carpenter, his name was Don. He was 67. He had no patience for most people and immediate patience for Harper, answered with complete seriousness. By June, she could identify every type of structural joint they'd used and explain why each one was there. Celeste came in March. Not October-March, 3 months after the storm, because the board situation had required her presence in Denver. Through February, and Logan had understood that, and because by March both of them had decided that 9 more months was longer than necessary. She drove up in a rented truck, not a luxury SUV, a plain dark truck, because she'd asked Logan what made sense for the roads in March, and he'd told her and she'd listened. She arrived on a Saturday afternoon when the sky was overcast, and the snow was the wet, heavy kind that late winter brought. And she pulled into the drive and got out and looked at the partially rebuilt cabin, with the framed addition visible against the gray sky, and said nothing for a moment. Logan was on the porch. He'd been aware of the exact moment she turned off the main road. She looked at the framing. That's going to be bigger, she said. Living room, bedroom on the end. She looked at him. 4 days in a blizzard, and you're building an extra bedroom. The addition made structural sense anyway, he said. She looked at him with the expression that meant she knew exactly what he wasn't saying, and was choosing not to press it because she found the not saying affectionate rather than evasive. Harper's at a soccer tournament, he said. Back at 5. I know, she texted me. She said this without looking at him, still looking at the framing. She wanted to make sure I got here before she did so. I had time to settle in. Her word, settle in. Logan looked at his 9-year-old daughter's strategic planning and found he had no response to it. Come inside, he said. She came inside. The cabin was different in March than it had been in January, the same 400 square feet of bedroom and kitchen and the equipment shed, but organized now with the efficiency Harper had imposed and maintained. Everything in its place, the space used well, rather than just occupied. Celeste stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at it. It's the same, she said. More or less. It feels different. She paused. It felt like an emergency last time. It was an emergency last time. Feels like a home now, she said it simply as observation. Then she looked at him. That's not a small thing. No, he said, it's not. She'd brought food, real food, the kind that required cooking, because she'd asked what they needed, and he'd said groceries, and she'd taken that seriously. They cooked dinner together in the small kitchen, which required negotiating the space with the particular physical awareness of 2 people who were learning each other's movement patterns. She was a competent cook. It turned out not technical, but practical, the kind of cooking that understood what ingredients wanted to do and got out of the way. Harper came home at 5:15, still in her soccer jersey, muddy at the knees, and walked through the door and saw Celeste at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and said, You're here, with a satisfaction that was entirely out of proportion to its casualness. I'm here, Celeste said. Harper sat down across from her without removing her cleats, which she's always did, and Logan always noted and had given up correcting. She looked at Celeste with the direct assessment she applied to things she was invested in. How's the ankle? Harper asked. Fully healed. 8 weeks. You said 4. My doctor was right. Don't tell him. Harper nodded. Filed this. Are you staying for dinner? I'm staying for the weekend, Celeste said, if that's okay. Harper looked at Logan. He looked back at her. She looked at Celeste. We have a system, Harper said. For the space. I'll show you. I'd like that, Celeste said. Harper finally took her cleats off and showed her the system. The weekend was not perfect. It was better than perfect in the ways that mattered, which meant it was real. Celeste slept badly the first night not because of the cabin, but because she'd been sleeping badly for years, and the habit didn't disappear because the circumstances improved. And Logan heard her moving in the kitchen at 2 in the morning and got up and made coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table in the dark the way they'd sat in the dark before, and talked until 3:30 and went back to sleep and woke up tired and functional. Harper made breakfast. The eggs were perfect. They spent Saturday working on the addition framing Celeste had asked, and Logan had shown her, and she turned out to have the same quality with physical work that she had with everything. Complete attention, no ego about not knowing, fast learning. She held boards while Logan nailed them and asked questions about the structural logic and listened to the answers. By noon, she was making suggestions that were correct. You've built things before, Logan said. Software architecture. She held a board level while he checked it. Different medium. Same logic, everything has to bear its own load and transfer force to the right places. If one joint is weak, it doesn't stay local. He looked at her over the board. She looked back. Same logic, he said. Yes, he nailed the joint. In the afternoon, Harper took Celeste on what she called the East Trail, which was a path Logan had cleared through the trees 2 years ago that wound around the back of the property and came out on a ridge with a view south down the valley. It was 3 miles round trip. Logan watched them go from the porch, Harper in her winter jacket, explaining something with the full-body emphasis she used for things she found important. Celeste listening, and then Celeste saying something that made Harper stop and turn and respond with the energy of someone who had been given an interesting idea to consider. He went back to the framing. When they came back, Harper was carrying a piece of granite she'd found on the trail, a chunk about the size of a grapefruit with a visible seam of quartz running through it. She put it on the kitchen table with the gravity of a significant find. For the new room, she said. When it's done, Celeste looked at the rock. At Harper. For the windowsill, yes. Harper picked it up and showed her the quartz seam. When the light comes through it in the morning, it's going to look good. Celeste held the rock, turned it in her hands. Yes, she said. It is. Logan looked at the rock, and at his daughter, and at the woman holding it, and thought about all the things you couldn't plan, and the things that happened anyway. He went to make dinner. She came back in May, and in July, and by September the addition was framed and roofed and drywalled, and there was a windowsill in the new bedroom waiting for a piece of granite with a quartz seam. And Celeste had been present for enough weekends that Harper had stopped making any particular note of her arrival, and started making note only of her absence, which was its own kind of evidence. In September, Celeste hired the CEO. His name was Patrick Dunmore. He was 44. He'd run operations for 2 mid-sized software companies and understood that his job was to run the machine so that the people who built the machine could keep building. He and Celeste had a difficult first month and then a functional second month, and by the 3rd month, she told Logan that she'd walked into a Monday morning and realized she'd spent Sunday evening thinking about a technical problem rather than a budget variance. And that was the first time in 3 years that had happened. What was the technical problem? He asked. Infrastructure redundancy and distributed systems, she said. Tell me what that means. She looked at him. You want to know? I want to understand what you're actually doing, not the business version, the actual problem you're solving. She told him. It took 30 minutes and a piece of paper with a diagram she drew at the kitchen table. He asked questions that were good questions, not because he had the technical background, but because he knew how to listen to what someone found important and follow the thread. At the end, she looked at the diagram. Wesley used to do this, she said. Asked me to explain the actual problem. Did it help? Every time. She paused. He said the explaining was where I figured out what I thought. She looked at Logan. You do the same thing. I don't talk much, Logan said. But I listen well. My former commanding officer used to say I had the most useful silence in the unit. She laughed. I'm going to use that. Go ahead, Logan. Yeah. She looked at the diagram at the kitchen table. At the cabin around them, which was now 600 square feet, plus the addition, which was almost finished. At the piece of granite sitting on the kitchen windowsill where Harper had put it until the new room was ready. "I'm happy," she said, not triumphantly, almost with surprise. The way people said something true that they hadn't expected to be true. "I keep waiting for the part where that becomes complicated." "It will," Logan said. "That's not the same as it stopping." She looked at him. "Are you happy?" He looked at the kitchen, the window, at the late September light coming through the pines. "Yes," he said. "I'm working on believing I'm allowed to be." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Not dramatic. Not a moment. Just her hand there. "You are," she said. He turned his hand over and held hers. October came the way Harper had promised it would. Ribbons went gold over the course of about 8 days in early October, the change moving down from the higher elevations like something being poured slowly. And by the second Saturday of the month, the whole mountain was the color. Logan had tried to describe in the dark at 4 in the morning, and the description had not been adequate, and the reality was not either, which was the nature of beauty at this particular scale. He drove them up to the upper trailhead on Saturday morning. Harper, in the back seat, with her library book she wasn't reading, Celeste in the passenger seat with her elbow on the window ledge and her face tilted toward the light coming through the trees. They parked in the small gravel lot and got out and stood in the middle of it, the three of them, in the gold and the blue and the cold that wasn't yet winter. Harper put the granite piece in her jacket pocket. She'd been carrying it for 2 days. They walked the trail in the easy silence of people who had learned each other's rhythms. Harper moved ahead, and then came back, and then moved ahead again, the way she always did on trails, as though she needed to see what was around the next corner, but couldn't stay there without checking that they were still behind her. Celeste walked beside Logan on the wider sections, and behind him on the narrow ones, and occasionally pointed at something, a bird, particular tree. The way the light hit the granite face of the ridge above them, and he looked at what she was pointing at, and she was always right to have pointed. They reached the overlook at the trail's high point and stood looking south down the valley. The town of Creston was visible, small and distant, its water tower catching the sun. Beyond it the highway was a thin gray line, and beyond that the plain opened up into the larger country. Celeste looked at it for a long time. "That's where they found me," she said. "Not to anyone specifically. A few miles east of it," Logan said. "Can't quite see the mile marker from here." She looked at the road. "The mountain. At the space between them. A year ago," she said. "January, so almost." She was quiet. Harper came back from the outcropping she'd been investigating and stood beside them. She took the granite piece out of her pocket and held it in the light. Quartz seam caught the sun and threw a small point of brightness against her palm. "Mom used to say," Harper said, conversationally, not quite to anyone, that the best things happened when you weren't expecting them. She looked at the granite. She said expecting something was a way of making sure it came out worse than it would have. Logan looked at his daughter. Celeste looked at her. "She said that?" Celeste asked. "Dad told me she said it. I don't remember her saying it, but I remember him telling me, so it's the same." Harper put the granite back in her pocket. "I think she was right." They stood on the overlook for a while longer, in the gold light and the cold air and the particular silence of a mountain that had been there for a long time before any of them and would be there for a long time after. Then Harper said, "I'm hungry." They went back down the trail. The new room was finished the last week of October, and the granite went on the windowsill, and in the morning the quartz caught the light the way Harper had said it would. Logan proposed in November, which was not a dramatic month, no snow yet, the aspens already bare, the mountain gone to its winter palette of gray and dark green and white stone. He didn't do it with a planned scene or a restaurant or a speech. He did it the way he did most things. Practically, honestly, in the kitchen after dinner, while Harper was doing homework at the table, and the dishes were in the rack, and the ordinary business of an ordinary evening was everywhere around them. He put the ring on the counter between them. It had been his grandmother's, a simple gold band with a single modest stone. Nothing like what Celeste could have bought herself, nothing designed to impress. Put it there and looked at her. "I know what I want," he said. "I'm not interested in taking more time to be sure of it." But I also know it's not simple, and I don't want to pretend it is. Celeste looked at the ring. At him. She was very still. It's not simple, she said. No. Harper and I. Harper picked the stone out, Logan said. She went with Carol to the jeweler. She had a list of criteria. Celeste stared at him. She knew. She's known since March. She's 9, not oblivious. He paused. She also told me to do it before Thanksgiving because she didn't want to have to pretend to be surprised at a holiday dinner. Her exact words. Celeste looked at Harper, who had her head bent over her homework with the studious focus of someone who was absolutely listening to every word. Harper, Celeste said. Harper looked up, neutral except for the corner of her mouth. Did you write a list of criteria for the ring? I wrote a list of things to avoid, Harper said. There's a difference. What was on it? Nothing too big. Nothing flashy. Something that looked like it had been somewhere. She paused. Things that were already important before they were jewelry. Celeste looked at the ring on the counter, at the simple gold band worn smooth in places, at the stone, which was modest and clear and had in fact been somewhere. She looked at Logan. Yes, she said. She said it the way she said most true things without theater, without the performed emotion of a moment that was aware of itself. Just the word, meaning exactly what it said, nothing added. Logan put the ring on her finger. Harper went back to her homework. Then, after a moment, she said, without looking up, now can we have dessert? They married in May on the property, in the space beside the new addition, where the aspens came close to the cabin and the mountain was visible above the tree line. 22-people family, Ray and Carol, Don the carpenter, a handful of colleagues Celeste had known long enough to trust, Harper's soccer team in their jerseys because Harper had invited them and nobody had told her not to. The ceremony was short. They had written their own words, which was Logan's idea and Celeste's execution, and what they said was honest in the way they had learned to be honest with each other without pretense. Without performance, acknowledging the difficulty of what they were taking on and the specific reasons they were taking it on anyway. Harper was the only attendant. She wore a blue dress she had chosen herself and carried the piece of granite from the windowsill because she wanted it there, and nobody asked her to explain why, and she didn't. After the ceremonies, when the 22 people had eaten and talked, and the afternoon light was moving toward evening gold, Logan found Celeste standing at the edge of the property, looking up at the mountain. He came and stood beside her. Okay, he said. Yes, she looked at the mountain. I was just thinking about the road. He followed her gaze. The highway was not visible from here, but he knew where it was. Mile marker 13.4. The drainage ditch. 2 faint red taillights disappearing under the snow. I almost didn't stop, he said. He had not told her this before. She looked at him. I knew what the stop would cost. Time, risk, being out in that weather. I had Harper in the truck. He looked at the tree line. I slowed down because I saw the lights, and for about 3 seconds, I thought about what it would cost and whether someone else would come. Why did you stop? She asked. He thought about it. The honest answer, not the tidy one. Because nobody else was coming, he said. And because 3 seconds was as long as I could make myself drive past someone in a ditch. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, I'm glad you can't drive past people in ditches. It's an inconvenient quality. It's a good quality. She paused. It's the quality, actually, the one everything else comes from. He looked at her in the evening light, at the ring on her hand, at the woman who had been a stranger in his back seat for 12 minutes, in his cabin for 4 days, in his life for a year, and was now not a category, not a word that felt adequate. Just the person standing next to him while the mountain went its afternoon colors and the 22 people behind them were still talking, and Harper was chasing somebody's dog across the field. There were things he knew now that he hadn't known before. He knew that grief was not a door you closed. You just learned to live in a house that had it in it, and after a while the door was part of the architecture, and you stopped treating it as the most important feature of every room. He knew that he had spent years believing that the best thing he could do for Harper was stay, just stay, physically, be present, not leave. And that was true, and it was necessary, but it wasn't sufficient. A man who stayed in the body but left in every way that mattered was not a present father, and he had been closer to that version than he'd wanted to look at. The staying had to include the heart, or it was just a body occupying a room. He knew that courage, which he had spent 12 years performing in ways that were recognized and decorated, was not the same as the courage required to sit in a kitchen at 4 in the morning and say true things to another person. The second kind was harder. He was still learning it. He knew that Harper was going to be fine. Not because everything would be easy, it wouldn't. And he knew that too, but because she was already the person she was becoming. And that person was someone who gave her coat to strangers, and wrote criteria lists, and carried granite to overlooks, and made room in her life for love, without being asked to, and without losing any of the previous loves that had shaped her. She was 9 going on something ageless, and she was going to be fine. He knew that Celeste had spent 3 years running toward a version of herself that was defined entirely by what she could build and control, and that the blizzard had not saved her from that she had saved herself, once she stopped moving long enough to look at what she was running toward and decide whether she wanted it. The mountain and the dark and the honest conversations had only given her the space to do what she'd been close to doing for a while. People saved themselves. What other people could do was give them the space. And he knew finally, in the specific way that knowing settles into something you don't have to revisit, that loving someone new was not an act of forgetting. It was not a replacement or a revision of a revision. It was simply what happened when a person's heart had enough capacity to hold more than one true thing at once, and most hearts did. If you let them, if you stopped treating the previous love as a wall and started treating it as a foundation. Sarah was in the way Harper held her fork. She was in the lemon cake he still made wrong. She was in the photograph above the wood stove retrieved from the debris in February. The frame cracked, but the photograph itself undamaged, cleaned and reframed and rehung in the new living room in the same slightly crooked way it had hung before, because straightening it had never seemed like the right thing to do. She was not diminished by what stood in the kitchen with a ring on her finger. She was simply there, as she had always been, as she would always be. Part of the structure of him, load-bearing, present in its specific way. He had been afraid for a long time that opening the door again would mean closing a different one. It didn't work that way. Doors didn't cancel each other. A house could have more than one. Celeste reached over and took his hand, the way she had at the kitchen table months ago, not a moment, just a hand. Harper's going to lose the dog, she said. He looked across the field. Harper was now being led by the dog rather than chasing it, which was an improvement technically, but not directionally. She'll find it, he said. You always say that. I'm always right. Celeste leaned her head slightly against his shoulder. Not a gesture from a movie, just the weight of a person who had found a place to put some of what they were carrying and had decided to put it here. What are you thinking about? She asked. He looked at the mountain, at the tree line, at the highway he couldn't quite see. About stopping, he said. About what happens when you stop. She was quiet for a moment. Good things, apparently. Good things, he agreed. Harper's voice came across the field. I have the dog. I have wait. Pause. I had the dog. Logan and Celeste watched their daughter begin chasing the dog again. Blue dress, graniteless now because she'd left it on the windowsill, moving at full sprint across the field with the total commitment of someone who had decided this problem was solvable and was simply applying sufficient effort. Something in Logan's chest that had been tight for a very long time was not tight. It hadn't loosened all at once. It had loosened the way the snow had that January gradually, then, suddenly, in sections, until the world underneath was visible again. He stood on his property in the Maylight with his wife beside him and his daughter in the field and the mountain above them all. And he thought about a frozen road and a pair of taillights and the 3 seconds in which he had almost made a different choice. He was glad he couldn't drive past people in ditches. He was glad the mountain had been there, and the storm, and all of it, the cold, and the collapsed roof, and the dark bedroom, and the honest hours that came in when everything else was stripped away. People moved through their lives building walls. They called other things routine, ambition, grief, survival, and sometimes it took something enormous to knock a section down and let the air in. The air was cold, and the opening was raw, and there was real work required to build something better in the gap. But the building was the point. It always had been. The sun moved behind the western ridge. The light changed. The mountain went from gold to the deep, saturated amber of a May evening, and the aspens caught it and held it, and Harper caught the dog, and the 22 people behind them were still talking and laughing and being alive in the ordinary, irreplaceable way of people who did not know they were part of something worth remembering. Logan stood in it. He didn't move. He let it be exactly what it was.